Hello dear viewers, support me by subscribing to my channel and share my video if you like it, and also make sure you comment your thoughts. Now let's start the video. Septons, the Septons, the Septons, the Septons, the begging brothers, even the Knates. When she returned to Sunspear, or more likely, the Water Gardens, she would have to have a little word with her father and her uncle about Ned Stark and how fast he could move. She'd wondered a bit about the ravens that had been coming and going from Castle Black. As they thundered down the road south, she realized with a start that Lord Stark was going to drive them on a brutal pace. They galloped for a long time, and just as she was starting to think that they were going to exhaust the horses, she saw the first way station ahead, or that was what Lord Stark called it. As they each transferred from a blowing horse to a fresh one, she realized that it was going to be a long day of hard riding ahead. It was. They swapped horse for horse. They rode and rode. Lord Stark, with his dire wolf loping effortlessly by his side. Every now and then she would vanish into the woods, to each side, and return with a bloodied muzzle. So she was keeping herself well fed. The humans in the party fell upon their meal, at noon, with gusto, amid much muttering at the pace, but none complained when Lord Stark kept up the same pace in the afternoon. Way station to way station, mile after mile southwards. Ned Stark was a man that father would have to respect. He moved at a pace that would make even father worry. And on they went. As they rode, he heard snatches of conversation from the others. The gift, they said, and then later the new gift, was truly coming back to life. Fields were being tilled, cottages inhabited, mills repaired, firewood collected. The North prepared. They slept that night in an old holdfast just south of the southern border of the new gift, and as she slumped into her blankets, she made a note to observe the others very carefully. When she awoke, she needed to. When the call to wake came in the morning, she ached in all kinds of places, but she made a point of watching the men and how they moved. Men were men, and men complained about their balls a lot after a lot of riding. They walked a bit differently too, and she made sure that she moved and grunted and grumbled the same way. Tyrion Lannister, of course, eyed her movements with a small smile, whilst Alan Lannister, well, he was not looking at her at all, or trying not to. Not that she cared. No. Well, maybe. He had nice eyes. Not that she could stare at him. Others might think oddly of her, thinking as they did that she was a he. The second day was just as hard as the first. Way station to way station. Blown horse to fresh horse. Galloping endlessly. The third day found them in the woods north of the Long Lake, and she realized dazedly that they were moving at a truly brutal pace. She was in pain now, a lot of jolted pain, through every limb, every muscle. Fortunately, at the top of the Long Lake, they embarked onto a ship, which meant that they could rest. Tyrion Lannister had a liniment that was in great demand, and she could tell that the wildlings were especially exhausted. There couldn't be many horses. Real horses, north of the wall, and she could tell that the poor bastards were not used to such riding. She also noted that Robb and Jon Stark were quite solicitous to the women, even if they were aware of the odd roll of the eyes from them, and when the Starks' backs were turned, the burning gazes, father would have laughed his head off at everything. As they sailed south, everyone relaxed and slept a lot, even the direwolves. She napped briefly, and then she woke up and started to sketch what she had seen on some parchments. This was important. She had to draw what she had seen. The wall, the Black Gate, Whites, and the others. That had been a fight that she had felt for quite time afterwards. Never had she felt such shame at being unable to fight as hard as she knew she could. Because she didn't have anything apart from her daggers. Lovely weapons, well balanced and easy to use. Also useless against Whites and the others. All she could do was stand there and then hamstring any passing limbs. For a sand snake it had been humiliating. She had started with some charcoal sketches and then inked over the final ones. The night fort, the wall, one of the Whites, and the other that had come closest to her. It still haunted her. That creature, the Whites. Well, she'd seen dead bodies before. A moving dead body had been horrible, but she could live with that. The other though, the way that it moved had been inhuman. The way that it had looked at her and the others, as if they were nothing but fly specks. Father needed to see these. Father needed to understand what was coming. She stared at the sketch. Was it good enough? Would father believe her tale of all that she had seen? Would Uncle Doran She sighed and then stared at the trees that were on the banks of the lake in the distance. The ship was moving faster than it had earlier, thanks to Tyrion Lannister having a word with the captain and then resetting the sails a little. "Not bad," said a voice behind her, and she jumped a little before repressing a curse. "Quite a good likeness." It was Lord Stark himself, who sat down next to her. "Tyrion Lannister had a word with me back at the wall, about who you really are." Ah, shit. She had been afraid of that. "I am Sarah Sand," she replied in a low voice, "daughter of the Red Viper. Please keep it to yourself, Lord Stark, at least until Winterfell." He nodded, before leaning a little closer. "Why are you here in the north?" "My father sent me. Lord Dane came to see my uncle at the Water Gardens, where he met my father as well. He said that he was headed north, to King's Landing first, to get his son, and then Winterfell, to answer the call. He knew that he was dying, but he had to go and he bore the sword Dawn." Lord Stark stared at him in some shock for a moment, before closing his eyes for a long moment. "Now that's a sword I know, all too well. I remember Lord Dane, vaguely from the tourney at Harrenhal, but he was not at Starfall when I left Dawn with his sister." He seemed to think deeply. "Did he say if his son was the new sword of the morning?" "I don't know, perhaps." Father just said that things were moving that he did not understand. "The Stony Dornish are sending what they can to the wall, but they cannot explain why, or at least, Father did not understand. Combined with the fact that the glass candles in the Citadel can be lit again, well, I ended up on the fastest ship I could find." Lord Stark absorbed this, and then nodded slightly. "All help is appreciated. Now that you have seen what lies beyond the wall, what will your father do? Dorne and the North are not exactly close after the rebellion." She sighed. "Father bears no ill will to you or the North. In fact, he respects you for doing what you did for your sister and your murdered family. He understands the importance of family, but he and my uncle need to know what lies behind this all. Why the Stony Dornish are coming north, what the call is. I was sent to the North to find out information, that is all." The Warden of the North stared at her and then again at the sketches. "Then these are important. Talk to Mance Rayder. He's a fine sketcher, or so I am told. The more you can tell Senspear the better, and at Winterfell you can talk to quite a few people. King Robert will be there." "Aye, he will. Lord Stannis, his hand, as well." And with that Lord Stark stood, nodded and strode off to the other side of the boat, where he sat next to the huge form of his sleeping direwolf, and then fall asleep himself. They sailed on, through the night, and most of the day, until they reached the southernmost part of the lake, where a jetty was waiting, and what looked like the start of a large village constructed from stone and wood. There were fresh horses there, and she didn't have to suppress a wince as she mounted, along with the others, and then started down the road that had been laid through the Wolf's Wood. Straight west they galloped, heading for the King's Road, changing horses at waypoints again and again. Day merged into day, sleep taken at waypoints or holdfasts along their path, the sleep of exhaustion and not a little pain. The direwolves seemed to be holding out the best, with the 3 Starks and the Greyjoy boy taking care of theirs, but there were drawn faces on all the men and women by then. One day, she heard Mance Rayder sigh to the other wildlings. "We'll all be proud to look back on this trip and say that we were there on Ned Stark's great ride south from Castle Black. By then we'll have forgotten the bloody pain it cost us all." And then he'd frowned and started humming snatches, and it was then she suspected that he'd started to make up a song about it all. On they rode, with Tyrion Lannister's liniment all but running out, until eventually they crested a rise on the King's Road, and saw on the horizon the tips of the towers of Winterfell. At last, Lord Stark said with what was half a sigh and half a laugh, before spurring his horse on again, "Winterfell! Brendan!" The twins loomed ahead of their party, and he suppressed a sigh. He remembered Walder Bloody Frey all too well. Hoster had called him the late Lord Frey because of his tardiness before the Ruby Ford, and all knew that the old bastard had never forgiven his brother for the all-too-true taunt. And now they were approaching the place where he squatted like an ancient weasel on a bulky chair. At least the party was not flying Tully colors. That would get them admitted, albeit reluctantly, but with an audience with Walder Frey sneering at them all. Instead they rode behind the banner of a white tree, with red leaves on a green background. The banner of the Green Men. It was a banner that had not been seen for many years, and it seemed to cause no small amount of confusion as they waited in the rain by the gate by the southern side of the twins. He'd raised his hood like they all had, and as the rain dripped off the brim in front of his face, he hoped that it would hide his identity. After what felt like an age, the gates finally creaked open and they rode in to discover a small group of men waiting for them. Some were guards, but he recognized the leading man. Ser Stervon Frey looked older and little more careworn than the last time he had seen him, but the heir to the twins was still straight of back and sharp of eye, because he recognized him at once. "Sepbrandon?" He looked over the party in some confusion. "I did not know that you were with this party." The guards did not recognize the strange banner. "We are traveling to the north, from the Isle of Faces," he replied. The green man was hanging back in the party, seeming to look around with a combination of interest and what might have been sadness. "The green men are abroad again," a gesture at the men and women around him, got some short, sharp nods, directed to Ser Stervon. This information caused the eyes of the eldest son of Walder Frey to widen for a moment, before flickering slightly with thought. Green men? From the Isle of Faces? There are strange tales about that place." "There will be more tales. The green men have answered the call." A man in the distinctive leather cap that the Freys seemed to favor had emerged from a side door and was approaching to one side. "Lord Frey wants to see them," he barked at Ser Stervon, who stiffened a little and then fixed the other man with a look of carefully hidden contempt. "He wants to know who rides under such an unknown banner." Ser Stervon smiled a slightly pained smile. "It seems that you will have to talk to my lord father." Brendan nodded shortly and then dismounted, leading the others. As they secured their horses in the stables, he jerked his head at Brienne. "Stay close to me in there," he muttered. "It's going to be unpleasant." She frowned, confused. "You expect treachery?" "No," he replied in a low voice, pitched at her ear, only. "I expect discourtesy. Walder Frey is close to his 90th year and is unpleasant, sarcastic, rude and prickly to any slight, real or imagined, to his family. You are a woman in armor. He will cast aspersions like petals on the wind. Be prepared." Brienne stiffened a little. "I shall," she replied. "Thank you for the warning." He looked at her and then nodded. The great hall of the twins was just as he remembered it to be, large, dark, gloomy, and full of weasels. At the head of the room was a table, and at that table, sitting in a huge chair with tower carvings, was Walder Frey, who looked as if he was about to drop dead from old age. There was a goblet of wine in one hand, and his eyes darted from side to side, as if he expected assassins to sneak out from the shadows. The moment that he laid eyes on Brendan, he sat up and glared at him. "The Blackfish, what are you doing, riding under such a strange banner?" "Father," Septa Stervon started to say. "They claim to be from..." "Did I give you permission to speak?" "I asked the Blackfish over there." As Septa Stervon was about to tell you, "We are riding from the Isle of Faces, under the banner of the Green Men." There was a muttering from the assemblage of weasels, but Walder Frey just sat there, his pale face working slightly as he looked at the Blackfish and the others, and then he threw back his face and let out a toothless bray of laughter. "Ah," he said eventually. "Blackfish, you do amuse me. Does Lord Tully know that his renegade brother has gone mad? Green men abroad indeed, naught but lies and legends. They do not leave their island." It was fortunate that the other green men had been warned by him earlier, as otherwise they would have bristled a great deal. As it was, Lord Frey was glared at quite a bit. Not that he cared. "The green men are neither lie nor legend, Lord Frey," said a voice behind him. As the green man stepped forwards, something flashed through the air. A coin, no, a token that landed heavily on the table in front of Walder Frey. The token for our passage, as was agreed many years ago. The Lord of the Crossing reached out with a slightly palsied hand and picked it up. The moment he saw what was on it, he paled and then thrust it away from him. "No," he said after a long moment. That's not possible. That token. My father told me about it. But no. The green men do not leave their island." And with that he shoved the token away. Brendan sighed and sensed that Brienne was stirring irritably next to him. This drew the attention of Walder Frey, who openly looked her up and down before smirking obscenely at him. "A Blackfish, finally settled down, have you? Look at her ugly as a fishwife. You should have come to me instead. I could have found a granddaughter of mine. If you like them, young that is." The horrible old man cackled at his own words, with some of his progeny joining in, whilst others, such as Sir Stivron, closed their eyes and winced. Brynden grabbed his temper by the scruff of its neck and stuffed it back inside him, but something must have shown on his face given the fact that Walder Frey paled a little. As for Brienne, she tilted her head back a little and looked down her nose at the Lord of the Crossing, as if he was nothing more than slug. So this is what House Frey has become. In thrall to a laughing dotard who thinks that he's being funny by being discourteous to his guests. The Green Man took a long step forwards, and it might have been Brendan's imagination, but for a long moment the candles and the fires seemed to burn lower. Your father would have been ashamed of you. Walder Frey squinted at the Green Man. And who in the seven hells are you? You're old and tall, and you claim you knew my father? He spat wetly to one side. I see that the Blackfish has gathered a company of fools around him. And who are you? The Green Man. The old man at the table gaped for a second, before laughing wheezily. Liar. They don't leave their fool island. Who are you really? Large hands pulled the hood up so that the antlers came into view. The Green Man. Yes, I knew your father. I remember the first time I laid eyes on you. I wasn't impressed. I think that I wanted to throw you down the nearest well. It was at the marriage of your sister to Lord Ambrose Butterwell at White Walls. A silence fell. Walder Frey was staring at the Green Man, staring at him as if he did not know who or what he was. Impossible, he quavered. That was more than 80 years ago. I am the Green Man, came the implacable reply. The years touch me a bit differently from you. I remember you. Snotty-nosed, rude, and dirty. He sniffed in disgust. Nothing really changes, does it? Walder Frey was almost cowering in his chair. Who are you? The hood came back down. I was once Sir Duncan the Tall. There was an astounded silence, and then a combination of muttering, laughter, and shocked comments filled the air. Stedfron Frey was staring at the Green Man with a look that combined shock with hope for some reason. Impossible, Walder Frey mumbled. You're dead. Dead since Summerhall. Died in the fire there. Dead. I was bunt, but I lived. The Green Man unrolled his sleeve and showed the horrific burns on his arm. Silence fell again. Walder Frey swallowed thickly, and then, just as he seemed to be rallying a bit, there was a hammering at the doors to one side and a guard slipped in, escorting a man dressed in black. Brynden blinked. He knew that man. My lord, quavered the guard. Your pardon, but this man of the Night's Watch arrived on the north side of the Twins. He demands to speak to you at once. Damn it, Walder Frey roared weakly. Night's Watch do not demand anything of me. What do you want, Black Crow? Men? Coin? Food? You'll have nothing from me. Not with this called nonsense roiling the small folk. Brynden glanced at the bloody man dismissively, and then stepped forwards. Ewan, isn't it? I've seen you at the Bloody Gate many times. The man in black smiled and nodded at him before stepping almost formally up to the table. Lord Frey, I am Yoren of the Night's Watch. I am sorry for disturbing you at this moment, but I was charged by the Lord Commander with showing as many lords as possible. And with that he placed a cloth-covered square on the table, before backing away. Proof, my lord. Proof of what we at the wall will be facing. The head of a white... A susurration again. The word lie was in the air. But all eyes were on Walder Frey. He was sitting in his chair, a shrunken husk of a man, whose eyes were darting between the Green Man, Brynden, and Yoren. With one shaking hand, he then reached out and pulled the cloth. Under it was a cage. And in that cage was a severed head. A head with rolling eyes and a mouth that opened and closed and hissed. This time there was horror in the susurration, as men and women shrieked and pulled away from the cage. Yoren watched this calmly, whilst Brynden noticed that Brienne merely blinked. The Green Men did not react at all, which was interesting. As for Walder Frey, he had gone as white as a sheet, and then blood seemed to flush into his face. His mouth opened and closed for a moment, and then one side of his face went slack and there was a sudden stench of urine as the man pissed himself, before his eyes rolled back in his skull and he collapsed bonelessly in his chair. As various Frey screamed and leapt towards the chair, Brynden suppressed a smile. What a tragedy. The desk in Ned's Solar never seemed to be free of paper and parchment. She looked at the heaps wryly, and then sighed a little. There was always so much to do in Winterfell. and with Ned away and Brandon just a boy, it fell to her to arrange matters as much as she could. Sansa, bless her, was trying to learn. She would be a lady herself in a few years, and Luwin was a tower of strength, but she missed Ned fiercely as she dealt with the 101 things a day that had to be taken care of in a citadel the size of Winterfell, especially with all the work that was being done on Wintertown nearby. Winter was coming. Everyone around her seemed to know it now, and she had a steady stream of people coming to her with progress reports of food being sown. Others harvested, yet others pickled or salted or preserved in some manner. And then there was the work on the broken tower. Once it was mended, they'd obviously have to find another name for it, but Ned's orders were being followed to the letter. The structure was sound. The rotted timbers in the upper courses had been removed, the stonework redone in places, and the scaffolding erected. It wasn't finished, of course, and the workers would be busy on other matters when the king arrived. Too noisy, otherwise. According to the last messages, the king was about 2 days away. Ned was on his way back, and was also about 2 days away, by her best guess. It all felt horribly tight, as if the world was pressing in around her, as if there was a flood of events bearing down on Winterfell. It worried her, and she also knew that it worried Luwin. She sighed again as she looked back, at the pile of work in front of her, and then she heard the sound of running boots in the corridor outside, followed by the frantic tattoo of knocks on the door. Startled, she stood. Enter. The door was flung open to reveal a panting Jory Castle. My lady, the watchtowers report riders approaching. Stark, banners. 'Tis Lord Stark, they report. Her heart leapt within her breast, and she beamed at him before sweeping out, the wheezing man following her. As she all but ran down the corridor, she saw Sansa and Domeric round a corner, Septim Mordane in tow, and she waved at them. Sansa, your father is approaching. Her daughter stopped, startled, and then she and her betrothed ran to join her, Lady running ahead of them and a huffing Septim Mordane behind. As her little party emerged into the great courtyard, she could see that Septim Roderick Castle was busy getting an honor guard in place, with many glares and not a few barked commands. He looked up as she approached and bowed quickly, before going back to making sure that the Lord of the North received a proper welcome back. The terrible threesome had emerged from a corridor somewhere, Summer gamboling ahead of them, whilst Arya and Nymeria had also appeared. Arya's dress had mud on it from somewhere, and she was wearing a helmet for some bizarre reason. She rolled her eyes at Luwin, who was nearest, and then Nan grinned briefly before taking it off her daughter. The gates were open, and her heart was pounding as they all waited. Ned must have flown down from Castle Black, and she wondered what it had cost him. And then there was the sound of horsemen, and she watched as the party came through the man gates, mounted on blowing horses. Frostfire preceded them, and she smiled as the other direwolves bounded up to their mother, as she guided them into a corner, and then licked each in turn. As Ned dismounted, she blinked. He looked so tired and thinner than he'd been for some time. Her husband had been driving himself hard. She could tell that at a glance. She wanted to run into his arms, but she had appearances to keep up, so instead she strode forwards. "My lord, Winterfell is yours." Ned smiled that special little smile that he reserved solely for her, and then nodded at her, before taking both her hands in his and kissing them. "Thank you, my lady," and then he embraced her. She melted into his arms, almost in tears. "Gods, I'm tired," he whispered in her ear. "We made good time, though." As she stepped out of his arms and looked at the rest of Ned's party, she smiled at the sight of Robb. He looked tired as well, as did Jon and Theon, but they were all healthy apart from that. Tyrion Lannister looked as if he was about to fall over, as did many of the others, and Ned called out orders for them all to be taken care of. "We have some interesting guests," Ned muttered quietly to her. "But first, are you well? Is the babe well?" "I am well, and it seems to be thriving. Luwin's pleased with me," she replied. "But what guests? I can see Mance Rayder again, and I remember Joer Mormont. But who are the others?" "I will introduce you." "Good, and then I need to tell you about the guest we have here." Ned groaned quietly. "Important ones? Robert cannot be here already. He would be roaring at me and slapping my back by now." "Important enough," she sniffed. "It might be best if you bathed first, though." "Oh, I do smell, cat, and my arse is one giant bruise. Come, let me introduce to the rest of the party, and then you'd best come with me to make sure that I don't fall asleep in the bath." Ned. He was tired, gods in the trees, was he tired, but there was too much to do. At least he now smelt a lot better, and he'd been able to nap for an hour or two. Not nearly as much as he would like to, but just enough to take the edge off his weariness. Robb, Jon and Theon had also bathed but were now asleep, and the word from the guest quarters was that so were all the others, except for Tyrion Lannister for some reason. But he himself had too much to do, and he was now sitting in his solar, staring at all the papers. Cat had done an excellent job, but there was so much that only he could do. The door creaked open and Cat entered, closing the door very firmly behind her. "Edric Stark is coming, as you requested," she said, as she sat down in front of him. "There's something you need to know first about Arya and Bran." She twisted her fingers together for a long moment. "I discovered something about them when you were gone, something that I had a hard time accepting at first. Ned, our daughter and our son are wargs." He stared at her. "Say that again? They're what?" "Wargs, Ned. Arya discovered it first," she said. She was having odd dreams, where she was in Nymeria. But then she realized that they were more than mere dreams, that she really was in her direwolf. She looked about the room, distressed. I did not believe her at first, when she told me. It slipped out when I was talking with her about taking her lessons with Septa Mordan more seriously. But she said that as the long night was coming, there wasn't much point in needlework if Whites and the others were coming, and then she said that she needed other knowledge, and that she was a warg. I did not believe her at first, not truly, which upset her, but once she showed me, then I believed. He sat there, absorbing that knowledge with wide eyes. She showed you." "She did." Her eyes turned as white as milk right there in front of me, and Nymeria obeyed every order I gave her, including tapping out the answers to sums with her paw. "Arya truly is a warg, and so is Bran. They both need teaching in this thing, and there is nothing that I or Lilwyn can suggest." After a long moment, Ned leant back in his chair as he thought very hard and very fast. "By the old gods, I knew that Arya wanted to be a warg, but 'tis another matter to become one. That said, why should it not be true, after all the things that we have seen over these many months?" He pondered again. "I'll ask Reader if any of his men are, or know of, wargs. The wildlings have often surprised me with what they know of the old ways. And if Arya's indeed a warg, well, that is something we can use." Cat sighed a little, but nodded, before pulling out the red ledger that he had seen before. "When you talk to Edric Stark, you need to have this." "I think." "Oh?" he asked, as he took it. "Why?" Bran noticed what we did not. "It has a rose embossed on the cover." "So it did. You think that there is a connection to the Company of the Rose?" "Given the list of what appear to be contracts inside, yes. And Ned, the last pages of writing are in your father's hand, or so Lewin told me." He leafed through the book to those pages and studied the script, before feeling his face pale. "Yes, the entries were indeed in his father's hand. Damn it, how did I not notice that before?" "You were looking for information on the others, not strange entries about contracts." Nod nodded, and then placed it to one side. "So much to do. I'll deal with the Company of the Rose first, and then see Buller. We'll try him in the Great Hall, I think. We'll do it properly so that Daisy will see her father avenged." "I'll make the preparations," Kat said as she stood up. "Oh, and Lord Dane wishes to speak with you." "I know," Ned groaned. "I know he's just a boy, or near enough, but every time I see that damn sword I remember the Tower of Joy." Ned did. When he and Lord Dondarrion pledged their help, that sword glowed. There's something odd about it. He stared at her carefully. "It did what?" "It glowed. I take it that it didn't do that, when you fought Arthur Dane." "No," he muttered, thinking back to that terrible day. "But the way that bloody man was all but gurning as he fought me, there was something going on with it. It seemed fine when I strapped it to one of the horses afterwards. Anyway, I'll ask him about it when I see him." A fist thumped on the door, and he stood as Cat bustled to the door and opened it to reveal a dark-haired man who looked a little younger than Ned. He was dressed in dark gray clothes, and he held a book with the red cover that looked surprisingly familiar. He also looked a bit nervous. "Edric Stark, Ned," said Cat, before leaving. His cousin hovered near the door for a moment, before stepping into the room at his gesture to approach, closing the door behind him. There was a long moment as the two men sized each other up. "You look a bit like my grandfather," Ned said eventually, breaking the silence. And you like my great-uncle, came the reply, before the other man seemed to recollect where he was. Your pardon, Lord Stark. I am Edric Stark, once leader of the Company of the Rose. He drew himself up almost formally, and then bowed and held out the book. The company is disbanded. In answer to the call, we have done out duty as was commanded long ago, and have returned to the north. Command us. Ned paused, before taking the book. Cousin, welcome back. But what do I even call you? Edric? Lord Edric? He hefted the book for a moment. Are these your records? I must tell you now that as the second son of my father, there is much that I was not told about you, in the company. A noise escaped Edric's mouth, something like a cross between a sigh and a groan. I feared as much. Hells, my father feared as much. He sank into a chair, ran a hand over his face, and then looked up at him. How much do you know about the Company of the Rose? Just that you were founded by exiles, those that refused to bend the knee to the Targaryens. Ned replied as he sat down himself and placed Edric's book next to the one from the secret room. Yes, Edric replied wryly. And, no, we were indeed founded by those who refused to bend the knee. The thing is that they were ordered to by Torrhen Stark, our ancestor. Ned stared at him. What? When Torrhen Stark came south to support the other kings in opposing Aegon the Conqueror, he was horrified by what had happened at the Field of Fire, the last storm in Harrenhal. So he halted his army at the Trident, as everyone knows, before meeting Aegon and bending the knee. What people don't know is that before he bent the knee, he went to the Isle of Faces and consulted with the Green Men, or rather the Green Man, the leader on the island. I didn't know that, Ned said with a frown. Few do, Edric replied. It's a secret passed on from father to son, amongst the Starks alone, when they come of age. He fell silent, or so I hoped. Lord Rickard never told you. He never had a chance to do so, Ned said grimly. As my father and I feared then. Very well. The Green Man of the time was Italian. He told our ancestor what he had told his nephew, the new Lord of the Riverlands. There were 3 things that they both had to know, only he added some more details for Torrhen Stark. All 3 things were secrets that had to be kept. The first was that any promises of new swords made from Valyrian steel were worthless, because the secret of making the steel died at the Doom. The second was that the Targaryens were just lesser dragon lords, not greater ones, so that eventually the dragon lore of the Targaryens would fade and the dragons would be lost, which was a shame because a time would come when they would be needed again. The third secret was that there was another piece of Valyrian knowledge that would fade with time. How to wed brother to sister and not have children that were deformed or lunatics, because when that happened, then Westeros would have mad kings, and that they would not be kind to Northmen. He remembered the moment that Jon Arryn had called him to his solar, pale and strained, to pass on the news that father and Brandon were not just dead, but had died in such cruel circumstances. Remembered all the tales of the Mad King, cackling and gibbering on his bloody throne. Those were 3 secrets that were all true then, he said hoarsely. All too true, but what does that have to do with? He stopped talking as the pieces fell into place in his head. Torrhen Stark created the Company of the Rose to protect northern nobles. He did. He ordered the main families of the north to send their 2nd or 3rd sons to Essos, to join the sellsword company that he was organizing and funding there in great secrecy, so that no matter what happened in Westeros, the lords of the north would always have kin that would replace them in the event of disaster. Such a mad king ordering the deaths of a lordly family on a whim. And although these past almost 300 years we were there, waiting in reserve, brokering quiet marriages with noble families of the north, keeping ties to the north, taking on assignments, like all sellsword companies, but never great and terrible ones. We were not the Gold Company, who supported the Blackfires. Instead, we were just the Company of the Rose, stolid and dependable. We would take on missions and inform Winterfell through secret ways. The final arbiter of we should do anything or not was always the Stark in Winterfell. He pointed at the books. You'll find the hand of many a past Stark in those books, on both sides of the narrow sea. We earned quite a bit of gold over the years, all safely tucked away in the Iron Bank. There is an account owned by the Starks, and that money is yours. And then there are those owned by each family in the company. Or there were. We have brought that money that we had over with us. Ned stared at the books and then at his cousin, stunned. How many families? I made a list. He pulled it out and handed it over to Ned. You'll find some names on it that have long since died out here. Blinking with surprise, Ned quickly passed his eyes over the list. By the old gods, he muttered after a long moment. Rid Starks, Ryders, Dustins, aye to all of them. There's even some Boltons. We heard that the family over here was reduced to just 2 true-born members. Ned could feel his mind whirring like a mitterish toy. He had always felt a certain amount of shame at the fact that the North had not prospered as much as other areas of the realm, that there were extinct houses here and there. And now, this will complicate some matters, and also mean that there will be lords reclaiming ruined holdfasts. We will cope with anything that arises. Rise that. He shook his head. You have done well, cousin. Edric hung his head for a moment. Don't thank me. Thank my forefathers. We came damn close to disaster, a time or two. Last time was when word came of the death of your father. Lord Rickard once went to Pintos, when you were young, I believe. He met my father there. They became good friends. When word came of his death, and your brother, and especially the nature of those deaths, well, it was touch and go if the company would remain in Essos or break apart and return to the north to lay our swords at your feet. My father was tempted himself, but talked himself hoarse, persuading people that they could not go. Ned thought about this and then nodded himself. It was proof of why the company had been set up. A bitter smile crossed the face of his cousin. Exact proof, as it were. It demonstrated why we were in Essos. I followed your progress with great attention. You have no idea how relieved I was when you triumphed. It shook the company. Robert's rebellion. This made a frown cross Ned's face. Wait, when Robert's rebellion was over and the Targaryens were thrown down, why did you not return then? 2 reasons. Firstly, Robert Baratheon is Targaryen blood and we did not know him. Secondly, no word to return came from you. Winterfell was silent and we did not know what to do. You could not send word. We send word via the secret channels. You did not reply. I never knew of those secret channels. I know that now. My father suspected that you had not been told of us, but we could not openly send word. That eunuch that reported for the Mad King was now reporting to Robert Baratheon, and we could not take the risk of muddying the waters by attracting his attention, especially as he had odd ties to people close to the Gold Company. The oath we all took, whenever a man or woman of the company came of age, still stood, not to return until we had word from Winterfell. But I did not send word, and you are here now. Why? The call, that always had precedence. Should the call ever be sent, should the others ever awaken, that extinguished one oath and replaced it with another, to return. Well, return you have. Will you keep the name Stark or found a cadet branch? I have sons and daughters. I was thinking about the name Rose Stark, in a holdfast somewhere. Ned stood, walked around the desk, and clasped hands with the other man. Then let me be the first to greet you as Lord Rose Stark of the North. Welcome home, cousin. Welcome home. Tyrion. He was several miles beyond tired and he wanted nothing more than to slump into a bed and fall asleep. The past few days had been beyond unpleasant, an unending series of painful jolts as they galloped south. Yes, Ned Stark was a formidable man indeed. Even father would have been impressed by the speed of their party. Uncle Jerian certainly had been. Much as he wanted to fall asleep, though, there was something more important that he had to do. That meant, of course, jumbling his thoughts back into order every now and then, but he paused as he realized that he was walking with his eyes shut. That was bad, very bad. A bad idea. He pinched the base of his thumb for a moment to wake up again and then walked on. Leniment. He needed more leniment. Wait. Leniment. Yes. He found Daisy Shorestone sitting in the Godswood, sitting before the heart tree. She looked very intent, focused. The leaves were whispering slightly in the branches above her, and he stopped dead in his tracks for a long moment, before walking slowly towards her. As he approached, she looked up and blinked a little, before smiling. Tyrion, I heard that you were back. I am. He sat down very carefully on what was hopefully a soft patch of grass. I'm a bit achy. She blinked at him again. I'd be amazed if you weren't, she said dryly. How many miles have you ridden? That was a good question. He paused. I'm not entirely sure. A lot. Over far too few days. Parts of me hurt that I didn't even know existed. I ran out of liniment. I'm afraid Other people begged me for it. She peered closely at him. Tyrion, are you all right? I'm a bit weary. Actually, I'm very tired, but that's besides the point. I saw many carts by the main walls with the sigil of House Surestone. Has anything happened? Her nostrils flared for a long moment. Willem Boodle is in a cell here. Ah, he said the word carefully. When is he being tried? Later today or early tomorrow. Ned's got a lot to do. Such as, the leaders of the Company of the Rose are here. Lord Dondarrion and Dane have arrived, the latter bearing a glowing sword, and the king is due to arrive the day after tomorrow. He thought that all through. Yes, I see your point. The wall was quite eventful as well. She peered at him again. So, I see, you have acquired the beginning of a beard, an axe, and 2 daggers. Tyrion suppressed a giggle. Oh, the beard was to stop my face catching a cold. The axe and the daggers were left to me by an ancestor of mine, one Tyrion Lannister. The daggers are called the Warnings. They glow at the approach of wights and others. The axe is called Rocktooth, and it kills wights and others. Quite spectacular too, I might add. Peering did not seem to be enough for Daisy Surestone, because suddenly she was boggling. Wights, she said, the word in a strained voice. Others, you have seen them both? That? Oh yes. His eyes were fluttering quite hard right now. Gods, but he was tired. Seen them and helped kill them. There were a lot of wights and 4 others. They were trying to get to Regan Stark, a member of the Night's Watch who was half-turned by another centuries ago, but who was saved by the Children of the Forest. He was carrying magic within him to help mend the wall, so that South could talk to North and North to South. We protected Regan Stark, Cold Hands, he renamed himself. Quite apt, actually, and killed them. I used Rocktooth on a few wights and another. Robb Stark got 1, Jon Stark got 1, and so did Uncle Jerain. Valyrian steel is quite effective. Then we got Cold Hands through the wall via a magic gate, and he fixed it and died. There was a long moment of silence, and then Daisy shuffled over to sit next to him. I think, she said eventually, that you are going to have to tell me exactly what happened. Only later when you are less exhausted and more coherent. What a good idea, he said faintly, his eyelids fluttering so hard that there was more darkness than light in his vision. I think a nap might be in order. And then he slumped down against her. The last thing he knew before he fell asleep was that his head was on her lap, and that her hand was stroking his hair as the wind gently rustled the leaves above them. Home. He was home. And then sleep took him. Area. Men were moving benches about in the great hall, and she sat on a low wall, with Nymeria sitting gravely at her feet, and watched. She'd been so happy to see father again, but also a bit nervous. What would mother tell him about her warging? Everything had changed just that little bit in the wake of that talk of theirs. She'd had to do a little less embroidery, which meant that she had a little more time to practice warging. And it was important that practicing. She loved Nymeria fiercely, and the last thing that she wanted to do was ever hurt her, so she had to be careful. Warging could be hard if she was tired, and some of the tales from old men about people who warged in, but could never warge out again were, well, they were a bit scary. Plus she had to teach Bran, who was a fast learner. She wondered sometimes if any more of her brothers or Sansa were wargs, or Uncle Benjen, or even father. It was a bit hard to ask Robb or Jon at the moment, as they were asleep. She wasn't sure why, they'd just been riding home with father. Now she could imagine father as a warg. Father could do anything, and Frostfire was. Well, she knew when she was warging into Nymeria. She'd warged into her direwolf an hour earlier, only to be stared at, and then licked by the adult direwolf in a slightly amused and slightly bemused manner. Frostfire knew. Grey Wind and Ghost padded past, sniffing Nymeria, and she looked around in time to see a yawning Robb and Jon stroll into view, followed by an equally tired Theon. They were all thinner than they had been, and she knew that mother was going to fuss and insist that they all eat something. She was glad that mother was treating Jon better these days. Come on, Trouble, Robb said affectionately. Father wants us all in the great hall. She frowned. What for? The smile vanished. Boodle's being tried. This time she blinked. I thought that wasn't until tomorrow. Jon shook his head. Today, the king's coming, and father wants this out of the way. He looked her up and down. Well, he said eventually, you're not too bad. Has Lady Stark seen you? Lady Stark, said a forbidding voice behind them all, has been looking for you, Arya. Septim Orden inspected her with a hint of despair. "Oh dear, come on, quickly. A clean dress and a comb through your hair will have to do." Protesting did no good, despite her very well thought out and well-reasoned arguments, and she even had to rub a flannel of warm water over her face, before being escorted, clean and sullen, to the great hall. The room was full, and as she squeezed onto the end of a bench next to Bran, she looked about. Domeric Bolton was sitting on a nearby bench, looking solemn. "He's there to record the proceedings for his father," she heard Sansa tell Robb. Lord Surestone was well loved. She was also fascinated to see that the imp had family next to him, one being the uncle that everyone had thought was dead and the other being his cousin. They all looked a bit tired. Doors boomed open to one side and everyone stood. Startled, she too scrambled to her feet, and then watched as father walked into the room, flanked by the old bear and, oddly enough, Lord Dondarrion, with Frostfire padding after them. Father was holding the Fist of Winter in both hands, and as they reached the table with the 3 chairs behind it, he took the central chair and then placed the ancient weapon in front of him with a formality that made her shiver for a moment. The other 2 men took their places on either side of him, whilst Frostfire sat to one side. "Bring in the prisoner," Father said in a voice that she had never heard from him before, low and hard and intent. More doors opened, and the sullen figure of Ser Willem Boodle was escorted into the great hall, guarded by Jory Castle and his uncle. The prisoner was pale as he entered and even paler as he finally reached the chair that had been reserved for him. "This trial is convened," Father said as the doors shut with a boom and everyone sat down again. "I, Lord Eddard Stark, the Stark in Winterfell, will preside over it, the trial being witnessed by the Lord Commander of the Night's Watch, Jeor Mormont, and the Lord of Blackhaven, Lord Beric Dondarrion." He looked at Boole, who quailed a little. "Ser Willem Boole stands accused of the crimes of murder and usurpation, in that he did murder Lord Torgon Surestone, and then did usurp his title, falsely claiming to be his heir." A lot of people muttered angrily about that, and she looked about the great hall, trying to catch what people were saying. She'd never seen the sea, but it must have sounded like that. Noise going backwards and forwards, hard to hear. Father paused, and then when silence fell again, he looked at the accused man. "How do you plead?" Boodle stood shakily, took a deep breath, and then looked about the room, raising his chin in a way that made him look like a cockerel with a neck problem. "I am innocent. I am Lord Surestone, as I was his heir." There was a shocked pause, and then a lot of people started to shout and all but snarl. The noise washed over her, but she had eyes only for the 3 men at the table. Father's eyes had narrowed dangerously, the old bear was sniffing contemptuously, and Lord Dondarrion looked as if a bad smell had passed under his nose. It was then that she noticed that Daisy had arrived, and that the imp was now sitting next to her. There was something odd going on between those 2, but she couldn't put her finger on it. Father raised a hand and the muttering stopped. Then he stood. "Maester Luwin, please bring forth Lord Torgon Surestone's will." The old Maester stepped forwards, a scroll in his hand that had 2 seals on it. "This was deposited under the care of Lord Stark last year, my lords," he said as he passed the scroll to Lord Dondarrion. The Lightning Lord inspected the seals carefully. "They have not been tampered with," he said gravely, before handing it over to the old bear, who also looked at the seals. "The seals have not been tampered with," the old man agreed, before catching Father's nod and cracking the seals and opening the scroll. He read quickly, handed it over to Lord Dondarrion, who also read it and then handed it to Father. Father read it, as well, and then handed it back to Maester Luwin. Lord Surestone named his daughter and only child, Daisy Surestone, as his heir, as witnessed by me, Father announced. "Maester Luwin?" The old Maester unrolled the scroll. "It is as Lord Stark said," he proclaimed grimly. "Daisy Surestone was the heir to Surestone, not Ser Willem. Word came to us last year, from Ser Edmure Tully, my good brother, that Ser Willem was a ne'er-do-well, that he was perennially short of coin, that he had alienated his neighbors, and was not trusted in the Riverlands. He would never have been a fit heir to Surestone, but then he was never the heir. There must always be a Surestone in Surestone, and he was related to the late Lord Surestone's wife, not Lord Surestone himself. No matter what this, Father curled a lip as he looked at him. Man thought he was never the heir. Daisy Surestone is... Bootle had been swelling with either rage or gas, with every word, and now he erupted. "Lies." He all but squealed. "Lies. I am the Lord of Surestone. That girl cannot inherit. She is nothing but a girl. And I— Silence! Father's voice cracked out like a whip and silenced everyone in the room at once. Boodle blanched and leant back from father's wrath. The will is clear. Lord Surestone told me that his only child was his heir. Told me to my face, and then wrote it in his will. Are you calling me a liar? The great hall was silence as Boodle's face twisted and his mouth hung open. After a long moment he shook his head fearfully. Now, as to the matter of the death of Lord Surestone, Maester Luwin said quietly, but firmly to one side. It was blamed on a stroke, my lord, but on the arrest of Ser Willem a search of his possessions was made by one Edmund Hunter, in service to Ser Mir Tully. Step forth, Edmund Hunter, father rumbled. The white-bearded man who had arrived with Boodle stepped forwards, dressed in the fish-scale leather armor that always fascinated Arya. What was found when you searched Boodle's possessions? My lord, Hunter said with a respectful bob of the head to father, we found a journal which mentioned that Ser Willem was deep in debt to a man called Collins, who was in turn in the employ of the traitor Petter Baelish. We also found this jar. He gestured to one side and another Riverlander walked up, with a stone jar that had once been sealed with wax around the edge of the lid. The prisoner seemed rather concerned that we had it, he said, the last words dryly, before directing a look of contempt at Boodle, who was in turn looking around for the nearest door with a look of abject terror. Father thanked the Riverlanders, telling them that his own thanks would go with them back to Riverrun and House Tully, before turning to Maester Luwin again. Do you know what is in this jar, Maester Luwin? I do, my lord. It contains a powder that I have tested. It is a poison from Essos, called Heart's Forlorn. It dissolves easily in liquid, such as wine, and if drunk, kills by mimicking an apoplexy, such as that which apparently killed Lord Surestone. It is a most cruel poison. Daisy was white as a sheet, and the imp was holding her hand now, whilst the crowd in the great hall was muttering and growling with fury. Father stared at Boodle again, and then raised a hand to quiet the crowd. You stand accused of murder, Ser Willem. What say you to this? I did not kill him, Boodle gabbled. I swear it. The stone jar? Boodle licked his lips, which were almost bloodless set amidst his pale, strained face. He seemed to be sweating a great deal. Not mine, he said hoarsely. Planted by my enemies. Arya scoffed. He lied like Rickon did. Very badly. A bench scraped, and then a bald man stood up. He was that odd, earless man who had arrived with father and who was wearing leather garments with bronze adornments. After father nodded at him, he straightened and then spoke in the old tongue, something that Arya sort of understood. My lord of Starkname, this man of the south would swear that he is innocent. Would he have him swear on the Great Fist? Legend has it that an ill oath sworn on it is quickly shown to be a lie. There was widespread muttering at this, as many people translated for others, and then after a long moment, father nodded slowly. Very well. Guards, bring the prisoner forwards to this table. Bootzel's boots scuffed and scraped on the flagstones as he was all but dragged before father and the other two men. Arya watched in fascination as something seemed to prickle her on the back of her neck. You'd swear your innocence, would you? Father smiled thinly, and then grabbed Boodle's hands and placed them forcibly on the Fist of Winter. Then here's your chance. Swear that you did not murder my cousin, Lord Surestone. The great hall was totally silent as Boodle looked down at his trembling hands, which father was still pressing down onto the ancient mace. He licked his lips nervously, his lower lip also trembling for a moment. And then he looked up, visibly gathering his tattered wits about him. I am not afraid of your legends and your heathen symbols, he hissed. I swear that I did not murder Lord Surestone. I swear that I am innocent. There was a long moment of tension, and then Boodle seemed to relax a little. Is that it? But quiets. Thunder rolled far overhead, and then there was a sudden flash of light within the hall, followed by a great boom that shook her to her very bones. All the direwolves threw their heads back and howled for a long moment, and then Boodle let out a choked half-scream as red fire seemed to engulf him for an instant. And then he flew backwards from the table and smashed into the ground, smoking slightly, his arms stiff in front of him. She knew at once that he was dead. Perhaps you should have been afraid then, father rumbled, and then the hall erupted with noise. Oberyn. Doran was riding one of his favorite horses, a brown mare that remarkably calm given its lineage. His brother was getting fit again in stages, starting with riding, along with a little sword work. He He was still listening to the maester, whose advice had lessened the pain in his feet from the gout, and although he kept good-naturedly complaining about it to Oberyn, he knew that his brother was intent on keeping to it. He sensed someone approaching, and he turned his head a little. Arianne was standing there, dressed in riding leathers and looking a bit wide-eyed at the sight of her father out of that damned wheeled chair. Quentyn said that father was better, but I never thought that he'd be riding again, she breathed. Before looking at him, your master friend deserves my thanks. He nodded, but then noticed that she still had a frown on her face. What is it? Uncle Oberyn, what's going on? He sat down on a nearby bench and waved a languid hand. Many things are going on. Can you be more specific? This bought him a glare. She waved a hand at her father. Father changes what he eats to get rid of his gout, because he wants to be healthy again. He start talking to the Citadel again, and researching the legends of the Stony Dornish. Uncle Oberyn, what is happening? Are we going to war? He stroked his chin. A good question, niece. Perhaps, but not a war that we are familiar with. You have heard about what happened to Lord Dane. I did. His son is the new Lord Dane, and also the Sword of the Morning. Other members of the Stony Dornish are going north. Even Anders Yanwood has sent men north to the Wall. Arianne narrowed her eyes. Anders Yanwood is an ambitious whoreson. Why is he sending men to the north? You just dislike him, because he thinks that Quentyn should be the heir to Sunspear, not you. And Yanwood is just doing what other Stony Dornish are doing, including House Fowler. Arianne sat down next to him. Why? The call. His niece eyed him carefully. Some of the salty and sandy Dornish doubt that the call even happened. I know. He smiled slightly. They are wrong. Something very, very old has woken up. Something that dates back to the first men, something that your father and I do not yet properly understand. Shoes scuffed to one side and a servant approached and bowed. My prince, a letter for you. He took it and then sat up. Seta's tanned. He inspected the wax seal carefully, found it unbroken and then cracked it open, before reading it quickly. As he read, he frowned. Interesting, he muttered eventually. Then he turned the page, read what was there, stopped dead, reread it, and then found his eyebrows shooting upwards. That's extremely... Now that's a sight I never thought I'd see, my brother rendered speechless. Doran had dismounted and was walking towards them, wiping the sweat from his neck with a damp cloth. What's amiss? Septinella has written from White Harbor. She has changed her plans. She's going to the Wall. Doran raised an eyebrow. Interesting. Why? She says that the call has been heard by many people, and that Ned Stark was meeting his main lords at Castle Black. Her trip to the Wall instead of Winterfell makes sense, therefore, but there's another reason for her going to the Wall. She writes that she's on the same ship as Garyon Lannister. There was a pause as Doran and Arianne both stared at her. Garyon Lannister? Doran asked in disbelief. I thought that he was dead, lost seeking Valyria years ago. Is Sefrila sure? He reread the letter. She says that he has lost an eye and gained a son, but that she is sure that it is him. And he is headed for the Wall. Interesting. Doran stroked his chin thoughtfully. Then we must await her next letter, and let the Stony Dornish know. He looked at his daughter. You look unconvinced, Arianne. She shrugged. I did not hear the call, father. We have some Stony Dornish blood, but not enough for me to have heard it. But it did happen, and we need to react. The Stony Dornish are heading north in response to it. It's affecting all our neighbors. When a decision is made in King's Landing about this, we will need to be ready. And do what? Durin exchanged a long glance with him. If need be, re-engage with Westeros, Durin said. Eventually. This call both complicates matters and simplifies them. The Game of Thrones is temporarily postponed. But what has replaced it? Where do the Starks stand in all of this? How old is this? Whatever it is, how dire is the threat? What will we need to do and when do we need to it? We need to know what's going on, Oberyn said restlessly. His feet twitched for a moment. It might be time to talk to a few people here and there. And he knew a man who had a very fast ship. Oh, and if old certainties were being eroded like sand on a beach before wind and tide, perhaps he needed to finally marry Ellaria. Ned. Daisy was going to have to go through all the wagons and carts and assess just what that repulsive little thief had taken from Sheerstone, and if any of it had been sold to pay off his debts. Fortunately, his main creditor had already been very dead by the time that he had returned to the Riverlands. Even so, he didn't want to risk Daisy losing any particularly prized heirlooms. So he had given orders for Lewin and Daisy to create an inventory of the wagons, and also for a small party to return to Surestone in order to reopen it, as he had no doubt that Boodle had had no intention of ever returning to it, other than to steal any remaining objects from it. Damn the man. Well, at least the ashes of Sir Willem Boodle would go back to the Riverlands in the possession of Edmure's men. He'd have to work out what to do with them. He winced slightly as he thought about the manner of the man's death. He had not expected that at all. Something slower, perhaps, but not justice that quickly. He was going to have to go through all the records again for any references to the fest. He already respected it, but he needed to understand it fully. As he sat down in his solar and stared at the books in front of him, he sighed. Robert was due tomorrow, and he was not yet fully recovered from his trip south, from Castle Black. That had been a trip that would stay with him for some time, especially given the bruises. He was impressed that those amongst his party who had not been that familiar with riding had made it. Tyrion Lannister had especially impressed him. The man hadn't let his fickle limitations stop him. He just grimly kept riding. He rubbed his chin. If the man did announce his interest in Daisy, then he'd have to take it very seriously, especially as she seemed to like him. Knuckles rapped hesitantly on the door, and he looked up. Lord Dane was standing there in the doorway, looking at him. "Lord Stark, may I speak with you?" He stood formally and waved the boy in. As the Dornishman entered and then closed the door behind him, he looked him over and did his best not to wince. He looked very much like his uncle, and also his aunt. He had the purple eyes of the Danes. Then Ned frowned a little. Perhaps the boy, because he was barely a man yet, was ill, because he was pale and sweating, even shaking a little. "How may I help you, Lord Dane?" he asked the question, as he gestured at a chair. Lord Dane sat in the chair, and it was then that Ned noticed that his knuckles were white as they gripped the arms. He was also leaning forwards, as it was not easy to sit with the greatsword that was slung on his back. "Ah, I see that you bear Dawn," he said politely. The time he'd seen that sword it had been in the hands of a sorrowing Ashara Dane at Starfall, and he forced himself not to think of her. "You must be the new sword of the morning, then." "I am," Edric Dane muttered, suddenly ashen-faced. Then he seemed to recall where he was. "Your pardon, Lord Stark. I am here to lay my sword at your feet." He stood and then drew his sword. The pale blade was just as he remembered it from his nightmares. But it seemed to be brighter as its wielder knelt and did as he had said. The tip of the sword was not far from Ned's feet, and he winced again as the memory of that sword, as it nicked his shoulder, all that time ago. Then he paused. The sword was shining. Kat had said that the sword had glowed when it had been at Bran's feet, but this was something else. He winced for a moment as the light grew, and then it faded. "You have our fealty, Lord Stark," said Edric Dane hoarsely. "Command us." Ned paused. "Apes." Then he nodded. "Sheathe your sword, Lord Dane. You have answered the call, and I thank you for it. You will have to forgive me. The last time I saw that sword was at Starfall." The boy nodded as he returned the sword to its scabbard, and then carefully propped it against the wall. My father said that he owed you a great debt for returning it to Starfall." He paused and then sank back in his chair. "He died in King's Landing, getting Dawn to me. He knew that I was the new sword of the morning. Normally there is a meeting of House Dane to decide it, but my father," his voice trailed away. The sheen of sweat was still there on his face, and his fingers still trembled. "Before he died, he bade me go to the Godswood in King's Landing and pray. It's an odd place, that Godswood. It lacks a weirwood tree. Instead, the heart tree is an oak. At dusk, when I prayed there, I heard things. Voices." Ned didn't think that it was possible, but if anything, the lad somehow became even paler. "I was raised in the faith of the Seven, but I think I heard... I think... You heard the old gods?" Ned nodded. "I have heard them too. There's no shame in admitting that you were frightened by it." The lad closed his eyes for a long moment, before nodding. "Thank you," he said quietly. Then he looked at Ned again. "I was told to pray again at the Godswood here in Winterfell. I would like to ask your permission to do so." Ned regarded him gravely before inclining his head again. "You may do so. Is that all you had to ask?" Lord Dane looked at him, his face working for a moment. "No," he said, eventually. "There was something else." The sheen was back again. as was the trembling, before he wiped his face, and then stilled his hands with what Ned recognized as an almighty stiffening of his will. Before he died, my father told me something that I must now tell you. He said that he was not my father. Yes, he raised me as if he was my father, but that my mother could not bear children. The woman I thought of as my mother, that is. I'm sorry if this is confusing. I barely know where to begin. He stared at the lad worriedly. I'm sorry, but what business is your family history to me? Because my mother was really Lady Ashara Dane, the lad finally blurted out. He looked at the door in a half-panic, before lowering his voice to the point where Ned could barely hear him. And my father, you are my father, Lord Stark. He sat there and tried to think this through. Ashara was his real mother, and he was his father? Impossible. I'm sorry, he said eventually, but that cannot be. If Ashara Dane was your real mother, then yes, I can see that. You have her eyes, but I cannot be your father. I knew your mother, and yes, I loved her dearly. But we never laid together. Edric Dane reached into his tunic and pulled out a letter. You met my mother for the first time at Harrenhal, I believe, he said quietly. The second time was at Starfall, when you returned Don and my Uncle Arthur's bones. This letter, my father, or the man I thought was my father, wrote it. He said that when you arrived, you were tired beyond words. You were wounded, you were grieving for your sister, your father, your brother, and the friends you had lost in the war. He said that you were reeling in your saddle and that your companion, Lord Reed, was worried about you. That night, you were tended to by a maester. You ate and drank deeply. You wept for those you had lost, and you had to be all but carried to bed. He wiped his eyes for a moment. You were comforted by my mother. She spent the night with you. Ned froze in shock. He barely remembered anything of his trip to Starfall. The Meister there had sewn him up well, with a liberal dose of the juice of the poppy, and then he had indeed had wine, and he froze. Surely that had been a dream. For all those years he had always thought that it had been a dream. Ashara's eyes, her tears of sympathy, the feel of her skin against his, those burning kisses, all a dream. It had been a dream, hadn't it? The lad held the letter out with a trembling hand, and in a daze, he took it. It was written in a hand that wavered more than a bit, but it was signed by Lord Alster Dane, and it confirmed the lad's tale. Lord Stark, if you hold this in your hand, then I am dead, and young Ned is with you. He is a good lad, and you must forgive him if he is stunned by the revelation that I am not his father. The truth is that you are. Young Ned was conceived the night that you stayed at Starfall. My sister, Ashara, told me all afterwards. She did not mean to lay with you. It was a moment of passion and grief, at the end of a war that had done grievous damage to House Dane, and in truth come close to tearing us apart as a family. My brother, Arthur, wrote to me before his death. It was an anguished, rambling letter, filled with regrets. He said that he was driven by his oath, but that he had done things that he regretted. He said that he no longer deserved to wield Don. Lord Reed, recounting your battle, told me that he struck my brother just after he had wounded you, and that Arthur seemed to be fighting with Don in that moment, that Arthur seemed to freeze as he tried to keep hold of Don. In that moment, I think that Don rejected Arthur. He had made it injure you, and Don is tied to both our houses in ways that I cannot explain. When you brought Don and Arthur's bones back to us, I think that a connection was made, one that I do not understand. I do know that it had one material impact. Ned, my own wife, could not bear children, so we took him in as our own and loved him greatly. He will be the sword of the morning, as Dawn will answer to him far better than it could to anyone else. I ask your pardon if my thoughts ramble as I write this letter. I am dying. I hope to see Ned in King's Landing before I die, and pass on Dawn. But you must know this of Ashara. She loved you dearly, and the little time she had with you was very precious to her. She knew the realities that you both faced afterwards. You were now the Lord of the North, married to the daughter of a Lord Paramount. I do not think that she quite realized how tired and heartsick, and yes, drunk, you were that night. She always loved you. When she took her own life, she was tired herself of existing in this world. She knew that her son was now being brought us as mine own, and she had experienced such losses. She had always been close to Alia Martell, and she was gone, as well as to Arthur, and he was gone too. Ned's birth had been a painful one, and she never truly recovered. You need to know that young Ned is your son, but you cannot acknowledge him as such. He is the last of the direct line of Danes. Should he die, then his cousin inherits the title, and Gerald Dane, also known as the Dark Star, is not a fit man to wield Dawn. I do not think that it would accept him, but he does not deserve to lay even a finger on it. I have taken Ned as my heir. The world knows him as my son. You know the truth that the world must not know. Forgive me, but we have no choice on this matter. Ned lowered the letter and looked at Edric Dane, who was looking at him with haunted eyes. As he peered at him, he realized that his bastard son may have had his mother's eyes, but that he had Ned's mother's hair, and also his grandfather's nose and chin. He stood, the lad standing at the same time, and then he took him in his arms, and embraced him. "You are my son?" he whispered, and he could feel the lad sob briefly as he mourned what he had lost, and what he had gained. "I cannot admit it in public, but you are my son, James. A long time ago, in Casterly Rock, a maester once tried to teach him the names of the stars that were emblazoned above his head. He peered at them and tried to prod his tired mind into life. That was Yes, the Ice Dragon. The Shadow Cat was up there, and the Ghost, and the Galley, and the Crook. He didn't know them all. Tyrion did. He'd ask his brother when they reached Winterfell. It had been far too long since he had seen his little brother. Far too long. He'd been surprised when he had heard that father had sent him to Winterfell, on a quest to find out more about all this talk about legends. Well, father had probably wanted to get Tyrion away from him. Father and Cersei were as one in their dislike of Tyrion, for reasons he would never understand. Tyrion had been a baby. Mother's death had never been his fault. False wishes, he wanted to laugh at the stars for a moment. When was the last time that he had been his own master? Truly. Lord Tywin Lannister's heir, then made a Kingsguard to a man he had grown to realize had been a madman, then Kingsguard to a man who was all impulses. And now what? The Fat King was now almost the demon of the Trident again. On the road north, Robert Baratheon had been riding around and staring at some of the hills in a rather odd manner, muttering about defensible crags and how the land had been fought over in the distant past. He had wanted to scoff, but then he had heard the conversations between the Baratheon brothers and Sarah Barristan. Selene had taken everything they said very seriously. Yoni, on the other hand, had wanted to roll his eyes. Crags, broken stone paths, bare places, legends. He paused for a moment, his half-smile vanishing. Legends. The head in the cage still bothered him. The man of the Night's Watch had gone south with it, but not before the entire party had seen it. Most had been very disturbed by it. So had he, at first. But then Cersei had talked about how it had to be a trick. Severed heads did not move, or gnash. It had to be a trick of some sort. Everyone knew that the Night's Watch was always desperate for men and supplies. The head must have been a clever trick to get both. A Myrish trinket, perhaps, with mechanisms that pulled on wires within it. Maybe, perhaps, what would Tyrion think of it? Had his brother already seen it, or something like it? What would Tyrion say about it? He stared at the stars again. Baratheon's bastard had also been fascinated and worried by the head. He was a quiet little half-stag, good at swinging a hammer over an anvil, at least. He knew enough to fade into the background at times, but Dae knew that Tommen had been to see him over some piece of broken stirrup or something. Tommen liked the bastard. Cersei did not. In fact, Cersei wanted the bastard dead, or just gone. She made him uneasy sometimes, speaking and acting without thinking things through. It ran in the family. There were times when he felt as if all he ever did was run from one place to another, forced by other people into situations not of his own choosing. Father wanted so much from him. Cersei wanted so much from him. He knew what her dreams were like, and his sworn brothers wanted so much from him. Duty came in so many forms. When was the last time he had done something for himself? Truly? He sighed and turned back to the inn that was close to being overwhelmed with the king's party, before pausing. There were torches on the road to the south. A lot of them, far off, but coming closer, like a storm of fireflies. He strode off to the guards who were standing by the road, also staring south. Selwer Barristan Selmy was with them, and as Jaime approached, he looked at him. Riders, Selwer's Jaime, and a lot of them. So I see, Jaime replied, headed for the inn perhaps. If so, there's too many of them to stay here. There must be hundreds on the road. They waited and they watched as the torches approached, and the riders slowed. Someone noticed them, and then a pair of riders approached, with others escorting them, behind them. Ime frowned. He could see enough of their armor to realize that they were from the Vale, and heavy horse at that. Then he looked at the two leading riders, and blinked at the tabards. A red castle on a white field within a red embattled border, and black iron studs on a bronze field, bordered with runes. Lord Redfort, Lord Royce, Sarah Barristan said with a nod of the head. Well met. There were two riders behind them, a man with the look of a Royce and a girl who seemed familiar for some reason. Sarah Barristan, Jon Royce boomed as he dismounted. So, the word on the road is true. His Grace is traveling to Winterfell. I am, came a voice from the darkness to one side, and Jaime blinked with surprise. His former fatness could move remarkably quietly for such a large man. To meet with Lord Stark. The Valyman kneeled in the road, before rising at the wave of the king's hand. Baratheon peered at the man hard, his face set with a frown. Why hide your armor under all that cloth? Bronze yawned. There was just enough light to see that yes, the burly man had indeed covered his armor in cloth wrapping, or something like that. Lord Royce smiled slightly, and then pushed some of the cloth back. Under it was one of the runes that he had always had all over his armor, and it was glowing. The others come. The Stark has called for aid, and we are needed. Your Grace, old things are waking up, and both you and Lord Stark need to know things, because in the words of House Royce, we remember. Ned. He took dinner in his solar. He didn't do it often, but he was tired, and the day had been a stressful one, and he needed to think. In those long hours after dinner, as Winterfell started to go to sleep, he had a son that he had never known about, and he was even called Nud. He wasn't sure if he should laugh or cry at this new turn in the road of his life. He had son that he couldn't ever acknowledge was really his nephew, and a real son who he could never even admit, even existed. There was a knock on the door, and he looked up. Catelyn was standing there in the doorway, looking at him with a look of concern. Are you well, Ned? He pulled a slight face, before standing up and beckoning her in. You'd best close the door and take a seat, he told her heavily. This needs to remain between just the two of us. She frowned, but closed the door and then walked to the nearest chair. Ned, what's wrong? Lord Dane came to speak with me. He laid down at my feet and said that he had heard the call. He pledged his fealty to me. He ran a hand over his chin. Cat, the sword glowed. Just you said. I've seen it before, but it never glowed before. Glowed and then, it shone for an instant. She nodded. Aye, it glowed before Bran. She looked at him carefully. Ned, what else happened? You have been out of sorts for hours. His wife knew him all too well at times. He sighed. Cat, I told you months ago that I would hold no more secrets from you. Well, this is something that I only found out today. Edric Dane is not the son of Alster Dane, and his wife, because she was barren and could bear him no children. His real mother was Ashera Dane. Spots of red appeared in Kat's cheeks. I remember her, she said levelly. I met her once. I met her at Harrenhal, Ned sighed. At the Great Tourney, and again at Starfall, where Howland Reed and I took ship for King's Landing. I bore Dawn and Arthur Dane's bones back to Starfall, and their maester tended to my wound. It needed more that Howland could provide. I barely remember anything about my time there. I was so tired, stricken with grief after losing Leona and my friends. The maester used the juice of the poppy on me before he stitched the wound, and there was wine because the war was over. But the mourning was deep for all of us. Apparently Ashara Dane visited me that night. All I remember is thinking afterwards that it had all been a dream, because I barely knew where I was. The red spots on his wife's cheeks were still there as her nostrils flared. Ned, she said in a voice that seemed to be tightly controlled, are you saying that Edric Dane is... He says he is my son, Ned said heavily. A son I never knew I had. I am sorry, Cat. I am sorry. I barely remember anything of Starfall. Cat had seemed to be struggling to control herself. So, you are saying that you have a bastard son that no one knows about, apart from him and us? Yes? A silence. And then, oddly, Cat started to laugh. It was a strained laugh that subsided into hiccuping giggling, but it was a laugh. He stared at her, his eyebrows going up. Finally, she recovered enough to look at him. You must admit, Ned, that this is the exact opposite to the situation with Jon. He thought about it and then felt a tired smile lift his mouth for a moment. I agree. Like Jun, we can never tell anyone the truth. He is Lord Dane now. He asked for nothing from me, other than that I should know the truth. He seems to be a good lad. It must have been hard for him to hear that the man he thought was his father wasn't. He sighed. Cat, I am so sorry about this. I really had no idea about this. Ashara was willful at times. She had just lost her brother, and well, I have no words. She is long dead now. All I can do is apologize. Cat closed her eyes and sighed. I am not happy at all, Ned, but you truly never knew about him, and I cannot blame him or you for the actions of his mother. You know that I have always distrusted bastards as being a threat to the true-born heirs, but as the world thinks that Ned Dane is a true-born heir himself, of House Dane, she opened her eyes and smiled slightly at him. I am not happy, Ned, but I cannot find it in me to blame you over much or him. I have a lot of thinking to do. In the meantime, the king will arrive tomorrow, and we have too much to do for me to worry about. Young Ned, I just wish that he had been given another name. I know, he said softly, as he looked at his wife and once again blessed the old gods for his luck. Cat had changed in these past months. So had he, if he had to admit it. Tell how the work has gone on the broken tower. As you had planned, it's ready. Then we just await Robert tomorrow. He stood up and held his hand out to Cat, who took it as she too stood up. He kissed each hand and then held her close. You are my wife. You have my heart. No one else. Just you. She softened into his embrace, and he rested his chin against her hair. Tomorrow it began. Asha. The word came for her to see her uncle, just after dawn. She'd finally been able to get a good night's sleep. Too many bad dreams of dead men and women, of charred ashes, of voices wailing on the wind, but she just nodded at the messenger before dressing in a hurry, and walking down the corridors that led to his solar. Nuncle Roderick was sitting at his desk, his new wife at his side. Both were looking at the message in front of them, with almost identical scowls of thought. They both looked up as Asha entered, and the reader smiled slightly and pushed the message across the desk at her. You should read that. It's from Pike. She felt a frown of her own forming on her face as she reached out and picked it up, before reading it. Then she reread it, and then she read it again. Father offers us a truce. She sat down and stared at the message again. A truce and a meeting on Pike, not in the castle, but the open air. Leaning back in the chair, she thought long and hard. It's a trap. Her nuncle swapped a look with his wife. I told you that she'd see it as fast as I did. Alette said, and she's right. I know that you're both right, he replied. Of course it's a trap. The question is, what do we do with the fact that we know it's a trap?
You could refuse to go.
He pulled a face. We need to make an effort. Somehow, we are all Ironborn. We must all live together on these islands. Your father has to realize that he has made terrible mistakes. But we are fighting to live and not to overthrow him. What the future holds I do not know, nor how we can make peace. But, he paused, deep in thought. Asha traded a troubled gaze with Elise and was about to ask what was wrong when her nuncle suddenly smiled. Asha, when can the Black Wind next sail? On the next tide. I always keep her provisioned and ready to sail.
As I thought.
Get your crew together. I am sending you to Winterfell. Her eyebrows flew up as she stood. Why? Oh wait, Baratheon is head for there, isn't he? He and his hand, Stannis Baratheon. He pulled a face. I don't like it. Not after the death of my sons, at Fair Isle. But the Baratheons demand peace in these islands, and appealing to them directly is one way to forestall whatever your father's plans are for this truce meeting. And if we do attend it with a representative of Robert Baratheon there, that will tear the sails of whatever father has planned. She stood and looked at the door. I'll sail on the next tide for Blazewater Bay, and then Salt Spear. I'll have to buy a horse on the road, but I'll try and make best speed for Winterfell. Aye, and I'll try and buy time. Send word when you can. She nodded at them both, and then headed for the door at a half-run. Well, at least she was going to be amid quite the host of people there. From what she had heard, Winterfell was going to be crowded. Jory, he seemed to be walking around in a daze half the time. Happiness did that to a man. He knew that now, especially as he was going to be a father. Anna had missed her moon's blood. She was with child. He was still coming to terms with that, Maester Luwin had told them that morning that he was indeed going to be a father. Anna had already had to tell him that she was not made from glass, and Uncle Roderick had slapped his back in congratulation so hard that he suspected that there would be a bruise. The man had hands like hams. Speaking of Uncle Roderick, he could see him in the courtyard below the gatehouse, where he was having an intense conversation with Lord Dondarrion and Lord Dane. The two Southerners were popular in Winterfell, both polite and well-spoken, but it was also important to remember that they were both also very formidable warriors. Lord Dane's sword was especially interesting, given its history, and Mikken had been a frequent visitor to the practice yards in an effort to see the sword. Star metal, he said it was. The rarest of the rarest kind of metal at that, and even there was something odd about it. The Stormlander and his Dornish squire were practicing their sword work now, using practice swords, with Uncle Roderick watching them and barking instructions about their footwork. To one side stood Thoros of Myr. The Red Priest was no mean warrior himself, as Jory could attest to. Pike and the blazing sword were still burnt into his mind. There were others in the yards, practicing with various weapons. Theon Greyjoy was teaching the terrible threesome archery in one corner, whilst Lord Stark was talking with his eldest two sons about swordwork in another, whilst Lady Arya watched from a wooden platform to one side. He wondered if Anna was going to have a boy or a girl. Did it matter? It would be good to continue the castle name, but with a second long night coming, well, all he wanted was a living child and a living wife after the birth of that child. And then Cregan on the topmost tower shouted down to him that he could see movement on the road, on the horizon. A great column of men on horses. Jory raced to the postern door and then up the stairs inside the tower to where Cregan was standing. The guard pointed and Jory pulled out the marish spyglass that Lord Roastark had gifted the garrison of Winterfell the previous day. Whoever was captain of the guard for the day was told in no uncertain terms not to drop it. It was too valuable. Focusing it carefully on the road that came down from the King's Road, he waited and searched, and yes, there they were. A long column of men which what looked like some women trotting down the road, banners flying at the head, some with stags and some with lions. Aye, he muttered, that's the king. And with that, obeying Lord Stark's orders, he pulled out a horn and blew a long, low note on it, as hard as he could. There was a startled moment of silence in the courtyard below, and then everyone was scurrying around like a flock of birds. He turned to take one last stare north, and then he clattered down the stairs. Robb. He had to confess that he was nervous, as he washed his face quickly and then stared into the mirror. Certainly his hand shook more than a little, as he rubbed his chin and he forced it to stop. He could not be nervous, not on this day. He turned, and started to dress himself. There was a little time until the king arrived, but he forced himself to dress quickly, pulling the shirt on, lacing it, and then tucking it into his trousers. The leather jerkin next, the belt, and then the boots. He grabbed his cloak, too warm in the walls of Winterfell to put it on yet, took ice from its stand, clicked his tongue at Grey Wind, who had been watching all of this with a fascinated tilt of the head, and then walked out of his room and down the corridor. As he emerged into the courtyard and pulled his cloak on, he had to admit to a flood of emotion. He remembered the king's arrival in that hideous future that would not be, and there were some parts that were alike and more that were unalike, but he still felt nervous. Father was standing there again, but this time with the fist of winter thrust into a loop of leather attached to his belts, so that its head was just below his armpit. Mother was next to him, chivying people with looks and gestures as they thundered past her, and Frostfire was a silent presence to his left, with Rickon and Fleetfoot at her feet. He took his place next to Father Grey Wind at his feet, and then watched as the others lined up to his right. Sansa had Domeric behind her, whilst Bran stood next to Robert Arryn and Edric Storm, which didn't surprise him, and then there was Jon. That was a big change from the last time, Jon's legitimization, and it was right to have him there, with Ghost at his feet. But as the others took their places, Jory and his wife Roderick Castle, Theon and Mist, Lords Roastark, Dane and Dondarrion, and so many others, he noticed a few absences. The Lannisters were missing. He knew why. Tyrion Lannister wanted to keep the news of his return quiet for the time being, whilst Tyrion Lannister said that he was too busy, and that he wanted to avoid his sister for as long as possible, and that besides the courtyard would be too crowded for him to see things clearly. The other absence was more personal. Where was Arya? Father was thinking the same thing, judging by his scowl. And then his errant sister ran up. Nymeria at her feet. Arya was once again wearing a helmet, and he smothered a grin as father shook his head, took the helmet off, and handed it to a grinning Roderick Castle. He hid a wince that had happened in that other time as well. Hopefully that would be the only thing that would happen again. There was a lot riding on this. He looked ahead and schooled his features. He could hear the rumble of horses on the road, now, and as he looked at the gateway, the first outriders rode through, holding Baratheon banners that snapped in the wind, followed by riders bearing Lannister banners, and then the trickle of riders became a stream, and then a river as the courtyard started to fill up. Perhaps Tyrion Lannister had been right. And then a figure in a white cloak and the helmet of a Kingsguard appeared, followed by another one, and he readied himself. What would the king be like this time, now that things were moving? Reports said that he had changed and was more active. Just how active was revealed by the hulking figure that rode through the gateway. Oh, this was not the fat king of his memories. Robert Baratheon was still a large man, but this time his chest seemed to be wider than his gut. He was different in other ways. His hair was cut short and he was clean-shaven, and there was something about his posture that was different. Last time he'd sat on his horse as if he was tired of everything. This time he seemed to blaze with an internal fire, and there was the hilt of an old and very large sword visible over one shoulder. Was that Stormbreaker? Robb swapped an astonished glance with father, before going back to looking at the flood of riders, some of whom were pulling off their helmets. Yes, there were already differences. He was sure that one man was Ser Barristan, Selmy, whilst another was Stannis Baratheon. But then there were the others, the hated faces. He set his face and squashed the hatred. I am Lannister, as languid and dismissive of all he saw as ever, and Joffrey, with the hound behind him. The prince looked the same arrogant little shit that he had been before, looking about the courtyard with a smug smile, as if he thought that this was barely better than a peasant's hovel. Then he caught sight of Sansa and preened, sending her a look that he obviously thought was an attempt to charm her. Robb eyed his sister out of the corner of his eye. She seemed not to have noticed the look. Good. Other faces caught his eye as an open carriage rolled in. Cersei Lannister, as cold and false as always, a look of the utmost indifference on her face, with her other children next to her. And then he sensed Merrick stiffen to one side, and just about caught his delighted smile, and then mutter of Sansa, that's Lord Redfort, from the Vale, and Lord Royce next to him. He looked at the two men carefully, and then nodded. More major lords, in answer to the call perhaps. They hadn't been there that first time. But then he saw the king bring his horse to a halt, and then dismount. Remarkable quickly, for such a large man, no stairs this time. As he did so, father knelt, with everyone following his lead. Robert Baratheon strode towards them, looming over them all as he came to a halt. And then he gestured with his right hand, an upwards wave of the fingers. Father stood again, everyone again following him, and looked at his friend. The king looked him up and down, and then stopped the first of winter. Nice stick, he said eventually. Almost as good as my old warhammer. Father tilted his head slightly, and then looked at the sword on the king's back. Nice knife, he said in the same almost dismissive tone of voice as the king. Almost as good as my old sword. There was a long moment of silence, and then the king threw his head back, roared with laughter, and then embraced father, who was laughing just as hard. Gods, Ned, I've missed you, old friend, the king said as they broke apart. 9 years. Where have you been for 9 years? Regarding the north for you, your grace, father replied. The smile slipped from the king's face. Aye, and now I know what from. We met a man of the Night's Watch, on the road. He had the head of a white in a cage. We need to talk of that, and this call. He looked at Frostfire, and your direwolves, I never thought I'd ever see the like of them. Your mace too, quite the natter we need to have. After I meet your family, of course. He could tell that father was a bit bemused, but in a good way, before he nodded, and the king turned to mother. Cat, he boomed, embracing her with one arm, whilst using the other to ruffle the head of an indignant Rickon, who was visibly thinking of biting it. As lovely as ever. Then he paused and took a half step back. Cat, you're positively radiant, glowing even. Are you? Mother nodded with a blush, and the king boomed with laughter and slapped father on the back, so hard that he almost fell over. Ned, you old dog, you always wanted a big family. Oh, sorry, Ned, don't know my own strength. Anyway, best wishes for the babe, Cat. And then suddenly the king was in front of him. He swept him from head to toes with a remarkably shrewd look. Last time his blue eyes had been bleary and a bit bloodshot. This time they were clear and seemed to miss little. "So, you're Robb, my namesake. I see that Ned's given you ice." "Aye, your grace," he replied with nod. The king tilted his head again as he assessed him, and Robb felt a slight shiver of something indefinable as he was the subject to such prolonged scrutiny. "I know the north is a hard place, but your eyes are older than your face," he rumbled eventually, before stepping over to Sansa. "Sansa. Yes, you are the very image of your mother when she was your age." Sansa bowed her head, and the king moved to Arya. "And who would you be?" "Arya," she eyed him up and down. "Your grace." The last two words emerged in a rush, and were obviously prompted by her remembering her manners at the last minute. The king bent down a little and looked at her. "Gods, you're a fierce one. Can you ride?" A nod. "Use a bow?" A nod. "Use a sword?" A half nod, followed by Arya freezing and looking in father's direction. The king roared with laughter and straightened up again. "Gods," he said again, this time with a note of sadness in his voice. "Lyanna come again." He stepped over to Bran and looked at him. "Brandon, yes."
Bran beamed at him.
"Yes, your grace, and these are my friends Robert and Edric." The king smiled as he looked at them, and then he blinked. Robert Arryn." Lord Arryn's son bowed formally. "Your grace." For some reason, the king seemed to be genuinely thrown. "Gods, lad. You've grown." Robert Arryn beamed at him. "Thank you, your grace." The king nodded at him, and then greeted his bastard son with a boisterous smile and a careful pat on his face. Then he turned to father again. "Let's go to your solar, Ned. We need talk at once. Stannis too." And with that the two of them strode off, joined by Stannis Baratheon and with Ser Barristan Selmy following. Robb watched them go with a slight sigh. "And now it begins," he muttered. "Fury meets winter." "Shaman." He watched the king stride off with the tooth grinder and Stark the stern and repressed a small worm of, well, he wasn't sure what. Worry? No. Unease? Perhaps. He sighed. Well, at least their long journey was over. Winter fell. It was bigger than he had expected, and a little less muddy. Oh, and quite crowded at the moment. As the crowd broke up and the king's party started to get organized in unpacking their things, he looked about. Lady Stark was talking politely to Cersei, who was being cold and polite back at her. Oh dear. His sister disliked their hostess. Well, perhaps she would start to like her a bit after Joffrey was betrothed to Sansa. He thought about this, and then smothered a guffaw. No one would ever be good enough for Joffrey in Cersei's eyes. And with that, he looked around. Someone was missing. Where was Tyrion? He stared around the scurrying crowd, but failed to see the short but toweringly sardonic figure of his brother. And then he saw a familiar face. No, pair of faces. "Jory Castle, is it not?" he drawled as he walked up to the man and the oddly familiar woman. "Are you well?" "I am, Sir, I may," Castle replied. "Be welcome to Winterfell." He looked about the place and smiled politely. The identity of the woman was still eluding him, until she turned to look at Robert Arryn, the boy who was so different now, and then something clicked in his mind. "I remember you now. You work for Jon Arryn as his son's nursemaid. Do you not?" She looked at him and then nodded gracefully. She seemed different, more alive somehow, less inclined to fade into the background. The last time he had seen her, she had been wearing a shapeless dress, but now she was resplendent in a dark brown dress that fitted really rather well and, well, she was standing rather close to Castle. Was the man betting her? "I am indeed his nursemaid, Sarah Hime," she replied, before sighing as the boy in question shrieked with laughter at something that Edric Storm said. "Although at the moment he needs me reminding him to mind his manners rather than any nursing." Yakremi smothered a smile with his hand, as Castle openly smiled before turning to him. "You must pardon how close we stand to each other. Sakremi, but Anna and I are now married." His eyebrows flew up. So they were officially betting each other. He smiled and nodded in acknowledgement. "Congratulations to the pair of you and the very best wishes for the future. Now, I wonder if you could tell me if you know where my brother is." Easily recognizable fellow. Uses very long words at times. Kessel nodded. "Aye, Sir Jaime. Last I heard he was in the library, in the main keep." Of course, he sighed. I should have looked there first. That or the nearest brothel, he didn't say out loud. Where is it exactly? Robert Arryn, Edric Storm, and Bran Stark hurtled past, all gabbling something about horses, and Anna Castle sighed, nodded her head at Yaime, kissed her husband on the cheek, and then picked up her skirts and ran after the trio, at a surprisingly fast speed. I can show you, Sarai, Jory Castle said with a small smile and then looked at the retreating figures to one side. Those three are something of a handful. So I see, Jaime replied. Robert Arryn appears totally changed from the last time I saw him. A shadow crossed Castle's face. I was there at White Harbor when it was discovered that his medicine was in fact poison. He has been weaned off it, and, well, you can see the difference. The boy is cleverer, no longer shakes, can ride, and has seen more of the sun. They crossed the courtyard in silence. After that, turned a corner, went across another smaller courtyard towards a doorway, up some stairs, down a long set of corridors, and finally arrived at a large door. The main library, Sarayami, Castle said, wryly. The domain of your brother, Maester Luwin, and the Lady Surestone. Good luck. And with that he nodded and walked off. As he walked into the library, he could smell the usual aroma of old books and heavily dusted shelves, and he paused for a moment and smiled. Yes, one of the natural domains of Tyrion. Then he looked around. A lot of shelves. A lot of books. Some of the former looked new, and a lot of the latter looked old. Hearing a murmur to one side, he strode quietly in that direction. Tyrion was sitting in a chair in front of a large table that was covered in books and pieces of parchment. On the other side of the table was a woman who appeared to be about Tyrion's age. She had dark hair, a square chin, and a nose that was a tad too large to make her pretty. She was looking through a large book in front of her, glancing occasionally at a picture on a piece of parchment to one side. It looks a bit like the Throne of Winter, only it's older, she said with a frown. How strange. And that inscription, I'm glad you didn't sit in it. Given the bones around it, I'm very glad as well, Tyrion replied. He had what looked like the beginnings of a beard on his face, and he would occasionally shift in his seat with a wince as if his arse hurt. I'd rather stay sane. He had no idea what they were talking about, and he was about to walk closer, when all of a sudden his brother's head came up and tilted to one side. Hello, Heme. You can always tell when I'm behind you. Chamia chuckled as he approached the table and then sketched a bow. Oh, it's the oil you use on the leather straps for your armor, his brother said with a smirk. Quite distinctive. My vanity will be the death of me. Aime smiled as he stood there and inspected Tyrion. He was a little thinner and his eyes were a bit different, as if he had seen something. But perhaps you should introduce me to your companion. Tyrion started a little and then looked at the woman, who was regarding them both with what looked like carefully hidden amusement. Where are my manners? Daisy. This is my brother Aemon Lannister, Knight of the Kingsguard. Yaime. This is the Lady Daisy. Surestone, the Surestone of Surestone, as she is known here. Jaime bowed his head. My lady, it is good to meet you, good sir, she replied with a graceful sitting half-bow. Lord Tyrion here has told me much about you. He eyed his brother sardonically. Should I be worried, brother? Tyrion smirked at him, just a little, then he smiled something more genuine. Of course not. Lady Surestone gathered up some papers and a book before standing. I will leave you two to your reunion. Tyrion, please let me know when we can resume our discussion about what you saw at the wall. I'll be helping Lady Stark with the preparations for tonight's feast. For the king. Oh, and I'll send a little more liniment. As she bustled out, Ten saw the look that he gave her retreating back, and sighed a little. Oh dear. He drew up a chair and eased himself into it, listened for the sound of the door closing, and then looked at his brother. You like her? What's not to like? Tyrion said with a careless shrug of the shoulders that was a little too careless. She's clever. She's fierce. She likes books like very few people I've ever met. She's striking, and she's near enough to my own age. So, are you courting her? Something flashed over his brother's face. A combination of pain and sorrow and anger. No, Tyrion said, eventually. I dare not. I care about her too much to risk her. Not after what happened to Tusha. He winced. One day he would have to tell Tyrion the truth about that. The two are not the same, though. Brother, this Lady Surestone is, well, a lady. Is she related to any of the great houses of the North, or anywhere else? She's cousin to Ned Stark himself. He late father was very well liked. Surestone! Surestone! He mulled the name over. Then something sparked at the back of his head. Wait, there was a Surestone at the Trident, or so I recall from the tales of the battle. A tall man on a horse with a battle axe who helped carve a hole through the line to allow Baratheon to get at Rhaegar Targaryen. He looked at Tyrion again. That was her father? Then she is nothing like Tisha, and not even father can criticize such a match. I know, but, Namie, I'm nervous. I am very fond of her, but without father's permission. She's a cousin to the Lord of the North. Father wouldn't dare harm her. Might glare at her a bit, though. Now, what's all this here? And what was that last part about liniment? Tyrion winced. I'm still recovering from my ride south from the Wall. We got back 2 days ago, and my arse is still one giant bruise. He leant back in his chair, checked that there was no one else there, and then smiled wryly. Father needs to know about just how fast Ned Stark can move, when he needs to. To me, a week ago I was at Castle Black with Ned Stark, 2 of his sons and a group of others. He stared at his brother in some shock as he ran the numbers through his head. But, that means that, that must have been hundreds of miles, and Tyrion, that's impossible. Not if you have a series of waypoints arranged, each with fresh horses. I have galloped harder and further than I have ever done in my life this past week, and by all the gods, my legs and arse and every part of me still aches a bit, even now. As I said, father needs to know how fast Ned Stark can move at times. Shamin nodded, thoughtfully. And how was the Wall? There was a pause as Tyrion flipped through some pieces of parchment and then slid one over towards him. He picked it up and looked at it, his eyebrows rising. It was a sketch in charcoal of what had to be the Wall. Then another sketch slid towards him. Castle Black, perhaps, and then a third. He picked it up and felt his eyes widen as he stared at it in shock. Is this
a giant?
On a mammoth? Yes, they really exist. I've seen them. He hesitated for a moment as he ruffled through a number of other sketches. Members of the Night's Watch had been going south from the Wall with small cages that were made by the first men. The cages contain white parts. Have you seen one yet? He went still for a moment. Yes, he said wryly. I saw one the other day. It was brought before His Grace himself. A head in a cage that still moved. Tell me something. How was it done? His words made Tyrion peer at him, with one of his head down, lowering looks, which was a sign that he was either puzzled or annoyed. How was what done? The head in the cage? How was it made to move? Wires? Levers? It had to be from Mir, yes? Tyrion's hands went still on the parchments. Then he pulled another one out and slid it across the table at him. Come in a dagger. It was real. It whites are real. I should know. I've seen then. I almost died twice at the Wall, once from rogue wildlings, and the second time from, well, whites. He looked down at the picture. No, pictures. Dead men running towards the person who had drawn the picture. Severed limbs, and an odd gait of some kind that looked like a mouth. You drew these? I did. I normally keep my artistic endeavors to myself, but in this case I thought that I had to sketch what I remembered, what I saw. I went beyond the Wall, Kime, at the Knight's Fort. He looked at them. You saw these things? I did. But, Tyrion, the whole point of chopping someone's head off is to make sure that they never move anything at all, ever again. Dead men, and women don't move. These did, Tyrion said the words with a brutal clarity. They ran towards me, or rather towards the half-white we had with us, trying to kill him, and us. It's a long and complicated story. But yes, they were dead, but they still moved. They were sent by these. Another picture, this time blue ink over charcoal lines that showed thin-faced things that looked like men but weren't. They wore old-fashioned armor, and they held odd swords. What are these things? Others. They are the reason behind the Wall, why the first men were so terrified, that they built something that split the land in two, and then founded the Night's Watch, an order that has lasted for who knows how many thousands of years. And let me tell you, brother, they terrified me. The very air around me grew colder as they approached. If we had not had 3 men with Valyrian steel swords there, well, I would have died. Fighting one was bad enough. None of this made any sense at all. Tyrion had fought one of these things. You fought one. With the help of this, he held up an ancient and rather odd-looking axe. Peculiarly enough, it's a Lannister family heirloom, left at the Night Fort by a distant relative of ours. It's called Rocktooth. He'd been wrong. Now, none of it made any sense at all. So, you went to the Night Fort to, help a half-white and then fought with full whites and others? Yes. There was a long pause. Are you drunk? No. Tyrion said the word with a dreadful finality. He was pretty sure that he wasn't drunk himself, and he stared at his brother and then at the pictures and then at Tyrion again. Someone opened the door behind him and he heard the boots of two people approaching. You seem to have had quite a trip, Tyrion. Oh, I've barely scratched the surface yet. Tyrion looked up at whoever was approaching. I haven't told him yet, he said, raising his voice a little. I hope he reacts better than you did. The newcomer's voice sounded familiar, very familiar indeed. But that was impossible. He turned and then gaped. Uncle Gerion was standing there, with a young man next to him. Hello, nephew. The dead are marching on the wall. He was pretty sure that life would never make sense ever again. Brendan. He was amazed by the change in the great hall of the twins, as he stepped into it. Old tapestries had been torn down, windows uncovered, and somewhere high above a large trio of windows had been unblocked. Now, shards of light speared down onto the dais, illuminating Lord Steffron Frey, Lord of the Crossing, and his oldest son, Sir Reimagined. The latter looked as if recent events had shaken his wits and somehow shocked some sense into him. The previous night had not been a restful one. It had been immediately obvious that Walder Frey was deathly ill in the wake of the apoplexy that had struck him down. He had been carried away at once by his immediate family, including those of his immediate sons that were there. The Green Man had watched them go with an inscrutable look on his face, before turning to the others. He will not last the night, he told them. Be careful, this place is like a tinderbox. And he had been right. As dusk fell, and the word from Walder Frey's chambers continued to be bad, the atmosphere in the twins had been strained, with various sons and grandsons of the wretched man stalking about the place in clumps, hissing at each other, eyeing particularly hated relatives. Knuckles had been white as they gripped the pommels of swords. Brendan, Brienne, and the Green Man had stalked through the place, preparing for their departure the next day. Euron of the Night's Watch had gone on his way, riding grimly south with his head in a cage, bound for Riverrun. He hoped that Hoster was well when he arrived. He had his issues with his brother, but he did not want him to have the same reaction as Walder Bloody Frey. The late Lord Frey had finally died just after midnight, whereupon his eldest son had shown that he had nerves of steel. He had immediately claimed his inheritance, being the first in line to the title, and also being surrounded by his sons and grandsons, with swords that were in some cases half-drawn. Oddly enough, one of them had been the Fool of the Crossing, Aegon, also known as Jingle Bell, only there had been nothing foolish about him at that moment, just a grim-faced man in dark clothing. The Green Man's party had immediately supported the new Lord Frey. Certain others had not. Sir Rhaenys Frey had tried to cull the top of the family tree a bit and replace his older brother, a silly idea as his second oldest brother Emmon Frey lived in the Westerlands. The head of Sir Rhaenys was now on a spike on the southern end of the twins, along with his son Rhaegar. It had been senseless and foolish beyond words, and he had wondered at the time why the man had done it. Now as he approached the table with the Green Man and Brienne, he could see that times had changed right there and then. The new Lord Frey had a piece of parchment in his hand, and seemed to be quietly pleased about something. As they approached he stood, and Brienne realized that he was sitting in a far plainer chair than the one that his father had always used. Lady Brienne, Sir Brynden, Sir Duncan, or should I call you just the Green Man? I do not mean to cause offense. I am just the Green Man now, came the response from the former Knight Commander of the King's Guard. I stopped being Sir Duncan the Tall when I set foot on the Isle of Faces. Lord Frey nodded, and then looked down at the parchment. House Frey, he said in a voice like iron, will shortly be sending a great deal of support to the wall. The list of those of my brothers and nephews and grandnephews who have decided to take the Black is a long one. He looked up. He seemed taller somehow. I will also send word to the Lord Commander, apologizing for the lack of support that the Night's Watch received from my late father. He did not believe. I do. I heard the call. So did my sons. Some have not been the same since for the right reasons. Yes. Brendan could see that, Aegon Frey, once known as Jingle Bell, was standing to one side, his hands behind his back and a sword at his side. He seemed more focused than before. Interesting, but had he been changed by the call, or had the call merely made the man within stop pretending to be a fool? I will not wait for a man of the Night's Watch to arrive to send them north, Lord Frey continued. Instead, I will send them north to the Neck, to Moat Cailin, and then hand them over to Lord Reed's men. And then he straightened up again. The others have returned. Lord Tully must know of this, if he does not know already. I will not be known as my father was, as the late Lord Frey. House Frey stands with House Tully and House Stark. Brendan nodded with the others, and then as they swept out, he wondered how long those Horsons, Black Walder and Lame Lothar, would last on the wall. Not long at all with luck. Ned, Robert was very different indeed, from the tales that Robb and Jory had told him. Oh, he was still big, and if he looked carefully he could see where the fat had been on him. But there was more muscle on him than he had had at Pike, and he seemed to blaze with energy. The kind that he hadn't seen since the Trident. That energy occasionally led him astray, as twice he charged down the wrong corridor, before being recalled by Ned's amused coughs. But it was as if the years had rolled back. As for Stannis, he was a little balder than at Pike, but still just as quiet and intense. But there was something a little different about him. The way that he looked about as if searching for something. When they got to his solar, he placed the fist on his desk, watched Robert prop what could only be Stormbreaker against the wall, waved them into the chairs that he had prepared for them, closed the door very firmly, and then poured 3 goblets of wine. No need for bread, salt and wine, not those two, although he would have been happier if it had been Jon Arryn instead of Stannis. Thank you, Ned, Robert said as he took his goblet. Gods, I would never have believed it. The change in Jon's boy. I'm sorry I didn't talk properly to your bastard son. I was that shaken by it. I'll tell you both something I'd never admit to Jon. I was beginning to suspect that Robert Arryn was a half-wit. Poor boy. All those fits, the wobbling head, the lack of brains, and then to see him like that. He quaffed some of the wine and then looked at Ned with a shrewd eye. He's no longer taking that, medicine of his, is he? Ned sat in his chair and sipped his own wine. No, he's been weaned off it, and the less he took the more he grew. Jory Castle escorted him north with his nurse, Anna, and from he said the lad started to change not long after White Harbor, where the poison was discovered. He's fast friends with my brain and your Edric now. The terrible Thrusame, that's what some call them now. Rightly so at times. Robert laughed at that, whilst a ghost of a smile crossed the face of Stannis. Then the laughing stopped as his old friend's eyes examined him. You look like shit. You've been pushing yourself, haven't you? Time to tell a few truths. You heard that I was at Castle Black? He waited for the nods. A week ago I was still there. I got back to Winterfell 2 days ago. There was a moment of silence as Robert blinked at him, and then he shared an incredulous glance with his brother, before straightening from his slouch. Bloody hell, Ned? Castle Black to here in 5 days? That's faster than you moved after the Trident. He felt a smile come and go. I had to talk to the lords of the north there, and then I had to greet my king. If you call me your grace, here, in your solar, I'll clip you about the ear, Ned. Robert rumbled. There was a creaking noise as he then limped forwards in his chair. Are things that bad at the wall, then? He pulled a slight face. Better than they were, worse than they need to be. The Night's Watch were down to 3 inhabited castles on the wall. After all that's happened lately and the people and supplies that have arrived, now the numbers doubled, nay tripled. The builders on the wall are repairing and replacing as much they can, but they need more. Lord Commander Jorah Mormont came south with me in order to speak with you about what the Night's Watch needs. Robert nodded slowly and then looked at Stannis, who raised his eyebrows. We saw a head in a cage on the way here, Lord Stark. Oh wait. Ned nodded. Then what else are we facing? Ned sighed. The others. But before we get to what we're facing, you need to know something. I was at the wall for another reason. I've met with Mance Rayder, the so-called king beyond the wall. Under my authority as the warden of the north, I've given him and his wildlings, the free folk as they call themselves, permission to pass through the wall and settle in the gift and new gift. Black eyebrows seemed to fly upwards like birds. Bloody hell's Ned, Robert rumbled. Why, the wildlings are naught but savages, as you told me yourself. Aye, he replied, looking his old friend in the eye. And I was wrong. I've been wrong about a lot of things, and I'm man enough to admit it. he sighed. The wildling raids against the wall happened because of a reason. They were being pushed south. Something was massacring them, forcing them to flee. So they did. They were planning to force a way through the wall. That was how desperate they were. He paused. There are a lot of the buggers. Far more than I ever imagined. Raider said that he could call on a host of 100,000 of his people. And before you tell me that's impossible, I've seen the wildlings passing through the main gate at Castle Black. Hundreds of them, hour after hour, an endless line of them. Giant and their mammoths too, all fleeing, all terrified. Ned stood up and slid the fist back into his belt. And we've been lucky, we almost had no warning of what's coming at all. Because Robert, do you remember the letter from Lyanna I got when we were at the Eyrie? It was on the day that Dennis tried to lift your warhammer over his head and almost brained himself. Robert's face softened for a moment as he remembered. Aye, I do. What of it? She wrote that on Brandon's naming day he was in this room with our father for a long time, and that when she saw him next he was different. Sombre, as if he knew something. I think that my father told him something, and I think he walked over to the wall and pulled the tapestry to one side to reveal the door. That my father took him in here. He rolled the tapestry back so that the bulk of the side of it could be held by a metal hook on the wall, and then opened the door. Robert and Stannis had stood the moment that he revealed the door, and now they stepped forwards. He had lanterns ready, and he led them into the passage, before stopping at the old door with the ancient wolf's head carving. Ned, what is this place? Robert rumbled. It's ancient. Reminds me of the crypts at Storm's End. He inserted the key and turned it, opening the door. The hinges still creaked a bit, but at least the dust was gone. He ushered them in and closed the door behind them. We still don't know what a lot of this is. The oldest of the records that were stored in here was on hide and were badly faded. Starks of old kept things in here. Secrets that thanks to Aerys Targaryen I never knew about. Robert was staring about the place, in bafflement. Then he blinked. You came of age in the Vale with me. And by the time I saw Winterfell again, my father and Brandon were both dead. I never knew this place even existed until recently. Then how did you discover it? Stannis asked the question as he stared at the skull with the horns. Time to tread carefully, at least for a moment. I had reason to believe that something was happening north of the wall. There was a message from the old gods. He paused, taken a little aback at the lack of scoffing, and then plowed on. I called on the lords of the north to send me all the intelligence they had about the others. You remember Great Janumber, Robert? Oh, aye, little man, quite quiet, Robert replied with a straight face. I remember him. He checked on an ancient Stark relic that my ancestors had given his thousands of years ago, telling them to check on it, and that if it ever changed color, whoever was Lord of the Last Hearth was to bring it to Winterfell. Great Janumber did check on it, and he brought it straight here once he saw it had changed color. He placed it in my hand, and I had a vision of the north. Like I was flying like a bird. And then the wall and the wildlings, and then a place called Hopemorn, where there was a thing shaped like a man, with horns in his head. The Night King, the king of the others. I saw him, and he somehow saw me. When I came back to my senses in my solar, I told everyone to search Winterfell for anything hidden, before, passing out. There was still a lack of scoffing, although Stannis was frowning a bit. You don't sound surprised. Ned, I stood where the old godswood used to be in Storm's End, and looked down at a weirwood tree sapling, touched it, and had a vision of a hidden place. Robert said in a very serious voice. Edric told me he'd had the same vision when he touched the sapling, and later on we discovered that place, the crypts where the Durendons, the Storm Kings of old, were buried. There was a statue there with a sword, Stormbreaker back there in your solar, and the statue its eyes lit up with green fire, and it called me Storm King, before giving me the sword. Magic has returned to the world, Stannis said through slightly gritted teeth. The statues of the Seven in the Great Septon in King's Landing have changed. They face north now in warning, after telling a Septon that death marched on the wall. His face worked for a moment, and then he stopped, rallied, tried to start again before pulling out a handkerchief and blowing his nose. My niece Shireen is no longer marked by grayscale, Ned, Robert said in a surprisingly gentle voice. She and Gendry, one of my bastards, found a godswood on Dragonstone. There was a heart tree there. She placed a hand on it, and the old gods healed her. Ned stared at the bald Baratheon, and then clapped him on the shoulder. Then we shall raise a goblet of wine to her continued good health. I am glad to hear of that. Thank you, Ned, I mean Lord Stark, Stannis rumbled, putting his handkerchief away. So, Winterfell was searched then. It was, and this was found. He gestured at the walls around it. Then he picked up the little stone bowl, which was covered in a piece of heavy cloth. And this. He pulled the cloth aside. Inside lay the hearthstone. It was not quite shining with light, but it was brighter than it had been on the day that the Grachan first brought it to him. The stone's the hearthstone. We don't know what the bowl is called. Placing the hearthstone in the bowl sent out the call. The two Baratheons peered at the stone and the bowl. So that's it? Robert asked. That sent out the call? Aye. Doesn't seem like much, does it? But it's drawn a lot of people here to the north. I think it restored all kinds of connections, like to the direwolves. Something else to tell you about. He eyed Robert. You didn't seem too surprised at the sight of Frostfire and the other direwolves, did you? Another bark of laughter from Robert and a wry twist of the lips from Stannis. Word on the road and word in the keeps and holdfasts on the way here were of Ned Stark and his direwolf. I told everyone not to react too much at the sight of her. Wasn't easy. Where is she? She comes and goes. Wouldn't surprise me if she's guarding this rim. That should surprise Barristan Selmy a bit. Right. These others, what do they want? All the records, both here and at Castle Black. Maester Aemon has found a huge cache from the Night Fort. All agree on one thing. They want us all dead. Every living thing. You can't bargain with them. You can't reason with them. You can't even threaten them. The wildlings have seen them in the far north, beyond the wall. The Night's Watch has seen them on the first of the first men, from the protection of an old secret vantage point called the Overlook, near a place called Craster's Keep, as well, and my sons Robb and Jon, as well as a number of other men and women fought 4 of them, and a small horde of whites just north of the wall by the Night Fort. Robert frowned a little. Your sons are alive. What did they have that the wildlings did not? Dragonglass. Valyrian steel. I gave Robb ice when I found the Fist of Winter. He slapped the mace at his side. In here, and star metal, the kind of metal that the first men use to make some of their most important weapons, like the fist, and perhaps Stormbreaker too. They're rare, but there are others. He raised both eyebrows. The Lannisters had an axe called Rocktooth. Tyrion Lannister found it at the Night Fort. He was with Robb and Jon, killed another with it too. A silence fell. Robert seemed to be having trouble processing what he had just heard. And Stannis actually had a finger in one ear to clear some wax out, or something like that. Eventually Stannis said what his brother could not. You what? The imp killed another, Robert blurted. Oh, aye. He looked at them both. I'm still not sure if, based on what Robb said, he wielded it or it wielded him, but he killed one of the others with it. And before you say anything else, you need to see this. He reached out, tugged on a glove, and pulled out one of the swords that Robb had brought back with him from the fight at the Night Fort. It was a long, wicked blade, made from some kind of crystallized ice that had somehow not melted, and he needed the glove because he hated the way that it felt in his hand, as if it radiated not just cold, but evil too.
Take out one of your daggers and then test it against this thing. Strike hard.
Robert gave him a quizzical look, and then pulled out a dagger and struck hard. Indeed, hard enough that he staggered as the dagger shattered into a dozen hoarfrost-covered pieces. Gods, Robert gasped. That was good steel, too. No wonder the wildlings flee them, Stannis said as he stroked his beard. What do they still use, north of the wall? Bronze? But Valyrian steel works against that thing. It does, Ned replied as he put the horrible thing away. We don't know why. Might be that the Valyrians use dragonfire to make their steel. Not that we know anything more about that. There was another silence. Robert finally broke it. The imp wields an axe like Stormbreaker. Aye, Ned replied. He's changed a bit. He knows what's out there now. Perhaps he can tell his father. Gods, muttered Robert. How is my good father going to react to all of this? He might take some persuading, but there's something else you need to know, Ned replied. I mentioned that there were others at that fight north of the Night Fort. One of them was Tyrion Lannister. He answered the call. Tyrion Lannister. Stannis all but spat. Lord Stark, Tyrion Lannister is dead. He sailed into the smoking sea and never sailed out of it again. Oh, he sailed out of it. He was half dead, missing an eye and clutching Brightroar, but he sailed out. It's a tale that will shake you. certainly shook me. There's a look in his eye when he tells the tale that shows that he's not the same man that left. He's been at the Summer Islands since then with his family. He's here with his son, they answered the call. His words brought him another combined stare of incredulity from the Baratheons. But the expression on his face must have convinced them. Bloody hells, Robert muttered again. Tyrion Lannister, with Bright Roar and his son. How old is his son? Old enough to fight with his father and my sons at the Night Fort. Tyrion Lannister said that he never told your good father about his family in the Summer Islands. Said that he'd never have approved of them. Wait, Stannis broke in. Tyrion Lannister heard the call all the way from here, in the Summer Islands. Aye, and before you ask, I do not know if any other Lancers heard it. Tyrion Lannister did not, but other families did hear it. The North is united like nothing else since the death of my father. The Skagosi have even sent ravens promising support. And people have been coming from the south, as I said. Lord Dane is here. So is Lord Dondarrion. I've heard that even the Ironborn have been sending help to the Wall. The Company of the Rose have returned. Something that I need to talk to you about later. And the mountain clans of the Vale are in the gift as well. Robert stared at him again, and then seemed to remember that he was still holding a goblet of wine, which he suddenly raised to his lips and emptied in one swallow. The mountain tribes of the Vale. This is where they came to after they vanished? Aye, he sighed. I need to have a long talk with Jon Arryn about this. They brought something with them. The banner of the last Griffin King of the Vale. Robert passed a hand that shook a little over his forehead and then tried to drink from the empty cup again. The mountain tribes of the Vale and the banner of the last Griffin King. By all the gods, Ned, I need some more wine. Then he paused. These others, you say they come from Hopeburn. Where's that? Ned nodded. Far, far north of the Wall. I'll show you the map. He opened the door again, ushered them through, locked it behind them, and passed down the corridor and out into the solar to where the annotated map of the North was hanging. As they approached it, he grabbed the jug of wine and divided the last of what was in it between the 3 goblets. It gave Robert enough time to get to the map and stare at it intently. Ned, what are all these places north of the Wall? Wildling settlements, Ned said grimly. As I said, there were more of them than we ever suspected. Most are abandoned now. The others hit the ones to the far north, a few years ago. Now you asked where Hopeburn was. Here. He stabbed at the map with a finger. So far north, Robert muttered. Too far north for any army to get to. That far north the horses would die like flies and so would the men. I know, Ned said heavily as he returned to his seat. My first instincts were to attack as well, but this is not that kind of a war. We don't know what strength the enemy is in, what his plans are, other than to attack and what he is waiting for us. An attack would be folly. The wall was built for a reason. Robert, and right now, our best stratagem is to defend it. The first men knew something they must have known. They built the wall. They created these artifacts, like the Hearthstone, the bowl, and who knows what else, to alert people that one day the others would return. Tyrion Lannister didn't just find Rocktooth, he found twin daggers called the Warnings, that glow at the approach of whites and others. He lifted his hands as if reaching for something, and then let them fall. Our ancestors, the first men, made all these things, created all these weapons and defenses and objects to warn us, and we damn near ignored them all. We almost missed all the warning signs, and the Night's Watch fell into decay, and the wildlings warred with them. Did you know that originally they acted as scouts against the others for the Night's Watch? Our ancestors built this great system, and we have let it fail in front of us. Us and our ancestors. There was a moment of silence. Too much time, Stannis grunted as he drank from his own goblet. Too much time has passed. The others have not been seen for thousands of years, and men reckon that a decade can be a long time. Men go to war for trivial reasons, and burns keeps and knowledge too easily. The Andals came and destroyed what they found in places, and then came the Targaryens, and their dragons. Lord Stark, it's a wonder that we still have anything after all this time. It was a remarkably prescient speech, coming from Stannis Baratheon, and Robert and Ned both looked at him before nodding. Aye, Robert boomed. You have the right of that, Stannis. We have been warned, and we are moving now. The South will stand by the North. We have no choice in this. The stakes are too high. Your people are not just preparing for war, but also winter. We saw the preparations with every mile we traveled. We'll send ravens summoning every manner of help. Now, Ned, repair the castles on the wall first. Get the logistics in place. We can't hold the wall existing on snow and ice once winter comes. We'll need food. A lot of it, Ned agreed. This has been the longest summer for 1,000 years. A long winter will follow it, I feel it in my bones. Lovefullen has heard from the Citadel that the Maesters are arguing over whether or not this winter will last as long as the summer that now comes to an end. I knew there was a war coming, Robert said with a grim smile as he drained his goblet and then stood. He seemed to be coming alive again after being so shocked and still earlier. He rolled his shoulders and then grinned at Ned. I've been training with a log again to get the fat off me. I'll need one here. Then he looked at Stormbreaker as it rested against the wall, before looking at the Fist of Winter. The gods have a sense of humor. Ned, you with a mace and me with a sword. Right. There's a lot of ravens we need to send out. Then I need to train and we'll talk again. Grabbing the old sword, he hefted it in one hand, then walked to the door and opened it, before sticking his head out. Are you all right there, Ser Barristan? Enjoying the novelty of guarding you in the company of a large and solemn direwolf, Your Grace, came the muffled response. How can I serve you? If you see a servant, wave them down and send the Maester here to see us, would you? We have a call to answer with Storm of Swords.